Hey, this is Travis Gafford, the double lift expert, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, this is Narrative Week, episode number 45. Here's the thing, if I was actually in Battle Rap, I'd probably do something clever with that, because one of the things, if you've ever watched Battle Rap, is everything has to be like a play on words or some illusion or something, and obviously, in American Battle Rap, they're coming from this urban culture, so it's always about the usual themes, shooting people, for some reason, minor prostitution. I don't really know why they brag about that to this day, personally. I've always found that morally reprehensible. Selling drugs, okay, that's kind of a libertarian issue, you know, it's up to them if they want to do that. So they'd probably spin it on some angle, like, you know, when my 4 5s come together and add up, it'll have a German saying 9-9. That's pretty good, actually. It's not bad. It's not bad. You see what I did there? Two nines. It's 4 + 5. 45. It's a gun. See, I don't know how much Battle Rap Kelsey watches, so I didn't want to like mansplain or anything there, but I was just checking she was following the reference, you know, because you have to understand
just checking that I can add.
No, I'm fully aware you can add, but the thing is, you are one of those people where you could actually even think that something someone said was funny, but you just think in your brain, that's funny. So yeah, no one knows from the outside.
I can't play too many cards.
It's exactly, you know? it's that impenetrable facade. So, yeah. whereas sometimes, I won't lie, sometimes when Emily Rand laughs at one of my jokes, I think like, is that just awkwardness? Like, is she just really uncomfortable with the joke I made?
She's just taking pity on you.
And she just wants it to pass. Yeah, and also on that show, it's just the two of us. So as a result, like, it would be a bit awkward if she just said nothing. And then it's like, well, that one bombed. Tough crowd, you know? So, okay, on this episode, 45, things must... Here's the thing, Kelsey. Either things are really looking up for this show, because you notice I've really been able to, like, consistently increase the quality of the guests, you know? We're not just working with all the Twitter analysts now. We actually get some players. It's either the quality of the show's gone up, or G2 has really had a bad year, because Perkz was one of those guys in the past where... He did this thing that, to be fair, in a way I admire, right? The reason why it's so hard to get like a Bjergsen, a Perkz, etc., is because every year they go to the finals, every year they go to Worlds, and so unfortunately, because they have like a one-track mind of like, I've got to win the final, and then when I win the final, I've got to go to Worlds, I've got to do well, and they don't want to say anything that might be like memed on or people make fun of them. They always say like, yeah, in the off-season I'll do it, and it's like, fucking hell, right? So you try to get to that point in time, and then they're like, no, I've got to wait till I sign my contract. So we had Perkz at one point. Did you ever come on Narrative Week, or did you just do Reflections? I'm trying to remember.
I don't think I ever came to Narrative Week. I only did Reflections, yeah.
We got him now, Kelsey.
On Narrative Week.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. That's right. That's true, because that was where I made that joke to Jankos, like something like, yeah, I've actually... I
think Jankos was at the beginning of the year, like with Giz and stuff, I think, yeah.
That was the one where I made the joke to Jankos about the fact that I had actually been the Katowice as well, and then it dawned on him the reason why. And I don't think he appreciated that. But look, I did the move that's a veteran interviewer move, which is you save the potentially controversial material to the very end of the episode. Like, you don't make it so they can walk out at the beginning if they don't like it. So, Perkz, as I alluded to, the reason you're here is because it's one of the times that you weren't in the finals. In fact, bizarrely, you weren't even in the top 4, so you weren't playing the third place game.
Yeah.
Has this been a shocking experience? Were you in any way mentally prepared for the idea might not be winning the LCS this split? Where was your head at?
Well, so like for every match, for most of the matches, I prepare mentally like for the best outcome and for the worst outcome, and especially like for the quarterfinals. But since I've never lost like before finals, like I was sure we're gonna win the quarterfinals, even though our scrims gone really bad that week. So like inside of me, I knew that we might lose, you know, but I like how I function is that I put my 200% and I like go all in on that, and that if it doesn't work out, then I'm just like really fucking depressed or sad for like 2 days, and then it's fine, and I just reset and I go and I move on, you know. So I was like really disappointed and shocked and sad when I lost, but it's like shit happens, you know. We had a team boom for whatever reason, and I think now we are playing better and better again. So, like, I have hope and motivation for Gauntlet, but it just happens, you know. It was hard to watch the finals from the home, but it's like yeah, sometimes happens.
I have to call you out on that tweet a bit where you said, this is never happening again. This is never happening again. And then you had to like clarify it with, I'm at least buying a ticket next time, you know?
Right.
Like that.
No,
that
one was like more of like a banger, you know, like a meme tweet, you know.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that's the thing, you mentioned it there, Perkz, but I have actually found from talking to people who've won a lot in their career, and obviously especially at the beginning where they haven't experienced losses many times, I actually think one of the psychological factors people underrate, okay? So people know guys like Score and Ryu who've like lost in the big moment so many times in their career. People always focus on them and are like, oh, did they choke? Like, you know, did it get into their head that they hadn't done it? There's actually the opposite effect as well. Like one of the reasons why people who are great champions win so many times and sometimes even win games where maybe it is touch and go. I'm thinking of like the last year's summer split where you guys were kind of like a bit ropey in the regular split, and then the playoffs you had that great series against Splice, and you know, like people didn't necessarily expect your team to win that one. But if you've won all the other times and every time you've been in a tough spot, somehow it worked out or you came back in the series, you kind of do feel like it's just going to happen, right? You know, you've got the belief. Yeah,
pretty much like that, yeah.
Has it been tough this year in as much as no flame to your teammates? That part comes later. No, I'm just kidding. No, but most people would say, Perkz, this has been one of the best years of your career, actually. Like, you might actually be a better player now than when you won some of the championships early on in your career.
I mean, I'm like by far so much better than I was ever before. And like, even if my performance was like really good last year, I feel like I'm like so much better this year. I cannot even describe it. So it like sucks that I can't always show it, but I'm sure I can show it in the Gauntlet and potentially the Worlds. So it's like this year I just learned so much more about the game in general as well. So, and yeah, it makes me just better. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It is actually, I feel like this year, especially this split, I feel like at the end of the spring split, like in playoffs, I was like just average. I didn't think I brought anything special to my team, and that came from a burnout, which was like really, really bad for me. But like I overcame that, and I told myself it will not happen again. Like balance my life more with League and like being like more positive in terms of like helping myself and my teammates to improve, but not like being overly negative, which sometimes maybe I am. So it's been so much better this split, so I didn't actually expect the team boom to happen. That's why the loss was like so shocking, you know. Like we were smurfing so hard, and then like we started becoming worse and worse, and then we had the boom, and I believe that we can smurf again though, so it's fine.
When you say,
yeah, okay, go on.
Sorry, I was just gonna ask, like, when you say team boom, do you mean you underperformed or something else is going on? Just to kind of clarify.
I mean, I don't want to go into details. It's like just a lot of like small problems that started occurring because of like probably I don't know mental. Like I think it's just mental problems. Like I'm sure if you had like I don't know, maybe like a sports psychologist or someone like Westerlund even like that we would like. I'm not saying it would not happen, but there's a high chance we would avoid that happening. Because we would like know more about how do we actually function as humans and how do we like function within the team. This is something that we had like help from last year. I think that's something that I found very helpful from Westerlund. And yeah, we didn't have that knowledge, and so that's why it happened, I think.
Right, when he said there, Kelsey, that like at times the team was smurfing, like obviously there were games in the split where both Perkz when they were playing funnel, and actually amazingly when they had to play those like weird supports. Jankos was even looking good early in the split. So, how would you like characterize the split for G2, Kelsey? Like when were they good? Were they the best at any point in time? Did they drop off towards the end before playoffs?
I think that there was a point in the split where a lot of people thought that the G2 looked like either the best or the second best team, and I think most people are actually saying they were even maybe better than Misfits. So it was like pre-Rift Rivals when they had just beaten Fnatic, I think, was the game where they were playing like Zyra, Confunnel, and then like a couple of other against Fnatic, and they won that game. So people are saying, okay, G2 looked like the best team in EU, right? There were a bunch of things that G2 had going for them, like Hjarnan just has some champions that he really likes to play, that he could actually play for once, like the Heimer and things like this. So that was like very effective for them. Obviously, Perkz is a very strong carry, so the fact that they could play like funnel and things like this and they found like a pretty good approach to funnel, really made them shine as a team that kind of found something niche in the meta that looked really, really strong. I thought, like, towards the end, when funnel was gone, when people are playing more ADs, that they had figured out sort of how to play, like, a little bit better as well in terms of their macro. Like, there were parts, I think probably the funnel as well, helped them work a bit together, like, mid-jungle, in terms of getting map control as a duo and things like this as well. And so that was coming through, but then it seemed like all of their old problems for Spring Split were coming back, approaching the tiebreakers, and then, of course, in the quarterfinal with Misfits. So that's what it seemed like to me in terms of like them transitioning lane leads to mid late game setups, like their bot lane, getting a lead, and then transitioning that effectively to the rest of the map. So I think that's kind of where it almost looked like they had completely regressed back to kind of like where they were somewhere mid-Spring Split by the end of this season.
Yeah, I pretty much that. I agree with that, yeah.
Was it fun playing funnel as the person getting funneled on?
Yeah, it was really fun. Like, I knew every game was won. I knew that no matter what, we're going to win the game. So it was just really fun.
Because in some of the like past splits, like I'm definitely thinking of like season 7 here, there was times where I would be reading Reddit and people would be doing that debate they always do of like who's better, Jensen or Bjergsen. And because of how mid lane played at the time, the whole metrics were like, look, he was up by 10 CS at one point in the game. I was like, what the fuck? What are we supposed to be judging here? Like, obviously no one was like going ham and just getting all crazy solo kills. So at least it was fun to have a time period where someone could actually carry the fucking game. That was pretty cool. It was fun to watch at least.
I don't know. It was really fun. Yeah, it's like people were saying at some point I think after the final nerf that people were saying it was like so fucking broken, but no one else was having as success as we were.
Yes.
And people were not even playing it in EU, barely like 1 or 2 games, like maybe. And in LCK, it was actually losing games. And when we would play against these scrims, we would win every game, and we would play it in scrims, we would win every game. But we wouldn't.
Think the secret was to making it work?
We wouldn't even practice. I don't know. We were like willing to. I think all my teammates were willing to sacrifice, like for me, and they were like smart about what to do, and we were like innovative and we were creative, and also I'm pretty good in those scenarios where people like sacrifice for me, and like I feel like I know how to win games, because we were not just AFK farming, me and Jankos, we were like ganking sidelines, and we were like taking vision control, and we were like doing objectives, and like we knew when we should play for turret or when we should farm, like when should I full carry, what item do we need, blah blah. Just a lot of like factors, and yeah, I think I was playing well. So in teamfights, it's not that hard, like honestly, in the teamfights, right? Because I have like supports and stuff. I just think we were like
7 kills.
like we had good macro, and I would get early kills. Mostly from enemy top laners, like on top laners would always int, so dirty inters, all of them. So I would always get fed on enemy top laner, and then it would be like really easy to play. Yeah.
Oh, it sounded like when I interrupted you there, because you were saying about scrims. I think this is something that actually, wasn't it Coldy that said this on the last episode, Kelsey? Didn't he say something like that? Actually, G2 and scrims didn't do funnel. Is this true, Perkz?
Yeah, we would not do it at all. I mean, we would do it like 1 game per 2 days, I guess. Because we just felt it was like so free win, so we were like always just practicing standard, right? And people were thinking we were like practicing in the streams, but like funnily enough, when the first came, like the Tariq Yi just first showed up on scene, we were like so fucking boosted, me and Jankos. We were duo queuing, and I was like tilting because we were so bad. I couldn't believe it. Like I was like playing 2 games with him, and I was like, no, we don't play anymore now. ICBA, and then. I don't know. Then I would see. I don't know where I would see the Kai'Sa or something. I saw it somewhere. I think I got inspired, and I was like, "Well, that sounds more like it." You know, I can play AD carry as well, so that sounded more like that.
That champ does look OP as fuck when you carry it. Like, as everyone who saw the LCK final saw, it looks absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, the Kai'Sa is broken. Yeah, I mean, I had fun like playing Lucian as well and stuff. We were practicing some Tristana. My Tristana was like. I was jumping in a bit too much, I would say, but it was kind of like reckless-ish.
Okay. There you go. That's a positive attribute there overall.
It is. That is now a positive. Yeah, that's good. They've turned it around. See, that's how you can change the narrative, mate. You've done it. So, what about this then? So, Kelsey, When they played this matchup, Misfits against G2, obviously Misfits themselves were the best team at one point in time, and they had the drop-off towards the end of the split. Did you have them favoured going into that matchup, Misfits? Like, was there a stylistic advantage? Yeah.
I was kind of hesitant because I think Misfits hasn't really been favored going into a quarterfinal even last year, like either of the times. So I was a bit hesitant, and I knew that there were some things that they could probably prepare well for in the quarterfinal. But I did favor G2. They looked really shaky going into the tiebreakers, but Misfits overall have just like had a really, really, really terrible second half of the split, and it felt like the parts of the game where G2 were struggling the most were also the parts of the game where Misfits were struggling the most. So it was most likely that G2 would come ahead. So I overall did not expect G2 to lose.
Perkz, when you said before, like based on scrims, you weren't that confident, right? Was that specifically against Misfits? Were they doing very well against you or something?
No, like when we scrim, like we won against them on stage just a week before, and when we scrimmed them, it was always like, we would never like win really hard, but we would always go at least 5-5, and we would know like we can really easily win against them. It was just the whole scrim week, whoever we played, doesn't matter. Like we went like 4-21 in this week. It was just like everything just crashed down. It was like, it felt like impossible to win. Like we had a mental block to win. Like even when we were ahead, like it was just, I don't know, it was like so crazy. Like now that I think about it, it's like, it just bringing back to me, bringing back the memories. Yeah, I don't know. This has never happened to me before. So I was just trying to be like, I was trying to be as like positive as possible.
Yes.
But I wasn't just sure what the fuck was going on. That's how I felt. Like I was just not sure what is actually happening and why is this happening, as I haven't experienced it before, you know. So
yes.
Yeah, it's like now I have experienced it, so I will be even more aware of it for the future, you know, or yeah.
See, the sad thing is there, Perkz, right? The reason we're like sniggering is because unfortunately the way you phrased that there, which is like, that's exactly how you'd say it in English, right? This hasn't happened to me before. That's actually famously the way that people would say it in the context of when they have erectile dysfunction, when they can't get it up. They say to the girl, like, oh, it's never happened before, honest. Oh, I don't know what's, I think I had too many beers or something, you know? It's like, sorry, Carlos. It'll never happen again, man. I swear, next season, just get me another Eddie Carey. I'll win the league, I promise. Listen, you know I'm good for it. You know I'm good, right? What about this then? So here's the question I have for you is, in this particular game, right, again, as I alluded to before, this isn't like season 2 where if you have a sick mid laner, he's just going to kill the other mid laner all the time. Yeah, it's not like that. But when people look at matchups, everyone has been hard flaming the fuck out of Senkox this entire split. And you were considered one of the MVP candidates. So why weren't you able to sort of get an edge there? What do you think happened in the series? Well,
I think the game is like really team related. It's like you can't really do anything by yourself. Basically, it's really all how you play with the team. Like it's really like, even like in the finals, like now last game Caps was getting solo killed by Nuke, but they played really well as a team, and Nuke couldn't do anything because they were just a better team. Basically, like I think I could have done way more in game 2 and 3. And I feel like I could have actually carried those games, like both of those games. Game 3, they were like hard hinting, and game 2, I could have like for sure carried if I was like better. So I guess I was just not good enough as well to like realize what to do in the game, because everything was like, again, goes back to scrims. Like I just didn't know what the fuck was going on and what to do, you know, as well, like as everyone else, you know. That's why it happened. But now I feel like I took a break. I basically forced myself, because I'm a league addict, right? So I forced myself to take a break for like 4 days from solo queue and stuff, and I went home and I got some like real life, you know, which I don't get usually. So I think that was very helpful for me. And yeah, I just feel like really fucking insane now again. So yeah.
Okay. Right, coming into this, let's talk about the final first, because like, let's face it, who gives a fuck about the third place game? I mean, I know they've actually found, to be fair, a clever way to make it important because of the circuit points. It's actually a good way to make people care. But I don't really care that game, to be honest. So let's talk about the final first. Then we'll talk a bit about the third place game. So in the final, obviously, Fnatic was there. They also were one of the very strong teams. They looked very strong in the playoffs. But they were playing against Schalke, who perhaps a surprise appearance, a team that got a lot stronger over the latter part of the split. What did you think, Perkz? Like coming in, Did you know Fnatic was going to win this one? Did you really think, was there a chance for Schalke?
I expected Fnatic to 3-0 them, honestly. I was surprised when I saw Schalke take the first game. I thought maybe like, holy shit, Schalke botlane really fucked their botlane, so maybe there's hope that they carry. But then Fnatic botlane just stepped their game up, and they were like not getting, and they were like winning or equal, so it was really easy series from there onwards. And also like Fnatic after 15 minutes, basically after the first red falls, is just so much better team than anyone else in Europe, and it comes from them playing together for 2 years. It kind of feels like the old team I played in, you know, like they just know what to do and they're on the same page. So other teams can do it. I think every one of the teams can do it, like Splice, us, Misfits. Like every one of those teams can do it, but we are just not always consistent, as sure what to do in every case scenario. Where Fnatic is. So to win against them, you actually have to play like an actual good and world-class team, right? You cannot just be like a good European team and get lucky. You know, you have to play actually solid every game to win against them. And the first game, Schalke just basically had like a win lane comp and then just run down into Nash and and take Nash, and that's how they won the game. They legit group Nash at 22 minutes or something, went there, killed one guy, and got Nash and ended the game. It was like so brain-dead comp. And then second game where it was not as stomp, they weren't really sure what to do, and Fnatic was honestly just outplaying them so hard around vision and how to like take good fights and stuff. And it's the same story for every other game, yeah.
Okay. Kelsey, did you actually think Schalke had any sort of chance?
I didn't really think Schalke could win. I was a little bit worried when I watched the earlier Fnatic series because I felt like they were making some of the mistakes that Vitality did when I watched did against Schalke. But I knew that like when it got to mid to late game, there were certain things that Fnatic would just do better. Like, for example, there was a point in game 4 where it was like Schalke were just playing super defensively while Fnatic was getting prio bot, and like they managed to catch someone with all of them, but then the rest of the Schalke members were not doing anything. There was a very similar situation where Schalke were pushing an advantage as a group, but the rest of Fnatic was just like taking top, taking mid, because they knew how to react to these types of situations way better. So it was just like seeing within the confines of the same game, like two teams playing completely differently under similar circumstances, that just kind of solidified that yes, Fnatic is just going to be a better team and understand like the map a little bit better on a consistent basis. So.
Right, Perkz, obviously Upset was a player who was hyped a lot, but mainly with like that potential thing of like, oh, he's so good in solo queue and he will be like the best AD carry. But it wasn't really actually until this playoffs that we got to see a lot of the high level games. And obviously, as you said, in game 1 here, he was a big part of the reason why they were able to win. What do you think about the way Schalke's team is set up? Like, is he like the win condition? They had to get him going to have a chance there?
Well, I think he's definitely been a big part of why they're succeeding, right? But I think that it's always like, as I mentioned, it is the team, how they play. And I think that big part to Schalke's success is actually amazing. And he's like the jungle support together. And how, like, what Upset does for the team is that he basically secures them late game. He's like, okay, basically how Schalke plays is you guys get me through early game. I mean, he does final lane, I suppose, right, and everything. But like, you get me through early game, and I will like carry you in teamfights. You know, that's how he plays. They don't play through bot carry or bot like take turrets or snowball them up. Maybe they don't like it, they're not good enough at it or something, you know. But he does do very well in teamfights, and that's how they play. So this is why they have been successful, I think.
Okay, what do you think, Kelsey?
A lot of people were praising Amazing, especially after the semifinal, but I do think it has a lot to do with like not just Amazing, but how Amazing is working with NukeDuck, and by that I mean stuff like like they will always pick, because they don't necessarily want to win through sides, as Perkz pointed out, but they will always pick like a counter pick mid matchup. And when I feel like Vitality are in a position where like when the jungler is coming to mid to contest Scuttle or something, then he won't say, okay, I'm going to do red and Raptors and then go for Scuttle. He'll just like be there, and then Jizuke may not always have the wave prepped. Like Jizuke will either push out or kind of just like get pushed in on like one of those two things. There isn't necessarily a system for how to set up like for jungle contests. So I think Vitality really got taken advantage of in that case, where Kikis would just come for Scuttle, and then Nuktuk would have the wave push, and then they could collapse on him 2v1, and that worked really, really well for them. And then there would also be cases where they would go to bots, and Vitality would be really, really forcing bot lane, but Shaco could play well defensively, and that would give enough time for like Nuktuk and Amazing to run together. So I felt like Nuktuk and how they play around Nuktuk is really effective, though it isn't necessarily just like Nuktuk as a player. But where I will definitely give Nuktuk credit is that he does have like the ability to pick counter picks, and they really focus on like this aspect of his gameplay. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Perkz, when you brought up Amazing there, this is an example of where like the narrative around a player can literally do like a hard fucking stop on a dime, 180, and then people go full speed the other way. Because all year long, in fact, for the last 2 years, people have been if you think they were flaming Senkox now, that was for like one split. These people have literally been like, Amazing shouldn't even be in the LCS, like going hard.
Yeah.
He's the worst mechanical player, like super hard. But now all of a sudden, because he made it to the final, and you know that's like a good career accomplishment, everyone wanted to go the other way, and suddenly like he's so valuable as like a veteran and stuff. Right? Give me like a realistic breakdown here, because certainly he is a very experienced player. And actually, you know what? You look at his career accomplishments, he's been with a lot of different teams to finals. Yeah, that's good. But he wasn't one of the top junglers, right?
Okay, so how I feel it, how I see it, is that he used to be like top jungler, right? Season 5, 6, yes. 6, yeah. And then like he did get really fucked in season 6. By basically Xenamite leaving, even though like not like he didn't get like super fucked, but he got a bit fucked, you know, because they wanted like a better team, and that made them like go relegations with Origin. And then season 7, when he had like a chance to actually play like with Caps and Reckless and stuff, he did get benched, even though maybe he was like, maybe there were some internal issues, right? But he did like, according to him, he got benched and he could peak, right? So there's like 2 like fuck ups in your career that's like not really like something that's like just a bit unlucky, you know. I mean, maybe not, maybe it is, you know. And then after that, like they played on Mysterious Monkeys, him and Kikis, and I thought both of them were like pretty good, you know, like not like top 3 or something, but both of them are like good at their roles. They're like smart, and what they bring is like they bring like kind of decisiveness. Like I played with Kikis, and I assume Amazing is like that, just from like hearing people talk about him. They bring like decisiveness and like, okay, now we'll fight. Like they pull the trigger basically. They're like not scared of pulling the trigger. They're not scared of looking boosted. They're not scared. They don't give a fuck what other people think. Maybe they do, but they don't care in game, you know. They're basically smart and decisive, and that's what they bring to the team. They're both stubborn as well, and that's like good and bad thing at the same time, you know. So this is why I think Amazing has like gone back to LCS and like kind of prove people that he's good. I mean, sure, his mechanics like aren't the best, but like I'm like not many junglers are like very, very good mechanically, right? So it's like I don't know. People like to shit on him because of the way he speaks, I guess. Sure. Like his absolutely. Tweets and the way he talks in basically in interviews and stuff, I guess. I mean, that's what I assume, right? He seems like kind of cocky or like
I would definitely agree
like with that, egocentric or whatever, you know.
Even but if you ignore when he
know him,
badly,
I know him, so I know that everyone is a bit like that, you know. Whoever is like successful or has been successful, and he's a really cool guy actually. So it's like people like it's just how it is, you know. People will always shit on you if you are like just not the best and you talk. Like doesn't matter what you talk. If you're not the best, like same with like with Gilius, like he was 8-0 in LCS and everyone was like, holy shit, Gilius is actually maybe the best jungler in EU and stuff, you know. And then they start losing, like, holy, Gilius is the worst jungler in EU. what like why is he in LCS? Like, it's just really funny, you know. Like that's how it is. If you talk, you have to like basically prove it, you know. I don't know.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, the best example ever, probably Doublelift, right? Because in all the early LCS seasons, everyone also used to just flame the fuck out of him. Oh, where's all your trophies, etc. Now, they're just like, oh, I love his confidence. It's brilliant the way he trash talk. Like, everyone's just done a 180 on that one as well. So, it is true. Winning changes everything. Kelsey, what do you think on this? Like, what's a reasonable profile of Amazing in 2018?
Yeah, I agree with Perkz' description for the most part. I do think that one thing he didn't really include was that Amazing has a tendency to tunnel on like 1 or 2 champions at a time. So that can make him a bit of a limitation in drafting scenarios. But I do think that like in the recent weeks, he's worked on it a lot. And the other aspect that really should be underlined is that like it takes a lot to be the one to step up and say, I'm taking responsibility for this decision. Because I think a lot of times you'll have teams full of like young guys who don't necessarily want to be the one who's making the wrong call. And then a lot of VOD reviews end up being, oh, but this wasn't my fault. This wasn't my fault. Whereas I feel like Amazing has a really good quality of like, we will do it this way. It's my call. If it screws up, then it is my fault. And I think that that's like a very important quality to have for at least one player on your team. And that's something that Amazing is very respectable for.
Plus, I will say one thing that people who were hating on him, like Perkz said, because of his interviews, because obviously, like, the big problem he had in his interviews, generally, I would say, is first of all, he obviously came off sometimes a little bit arrogant because he had the accomplishments. So he was trying to say, yeah, you know, we went to Worlds and did this, that, and the other. And obviously, if you're not, like, considered the best player of the team, in theory, on Reddit, you're not supposed to talk like that, you know, because people will be like, you were just carried by whoever is in the mid lane, you know, whoever it is, right? But also, he also did have the problem that, like, we don't actually know what he's like as a teammate. Like, when I think back, I can't think of many players in interviews who were his teammates ever even addressing what he was like as. I will say it's very notable that no one ever said generally I think that he was a bad teammate. That's a pretty good sign because, by the way, when you've been in teams with people like Soaz, the TSM players, when you leave the team, they'll definitely fucking say it eventually in an interview. You know, if someone asks them about history, they're not going to hide the fact that they didn't like playing with you. So that's actually a pretty good sign. And that is one thing people will never understand is that there are players who outwardly might be hostile or people might not like the way they are, but it doesn't really matter in the team as long as they're good teammates, as long as they communicate well with this guy, don't flame people. It's just unfortunately people always think there's carryover. So for example, if they see Amazing and they think that he's like delusional, thinks he's better than he is, then they're going to imagine he addresses his teammates that way. Whereas it's not always the case. I know some players who can be almost like completely the opposite in that particular sense. In fact, some of them that are really nice in practice are the ones who seem a bit like arseholes in public. Some people are just like that, you know, fans. Anyway, so, right, Perkz, in this final, one of the other storylines that everyone wondered about was like who the top laner would be for Fnatic. But luckily, Schalke did us all a favour by doing what I call the Korean substitution, which is where if you lose the first game, you just bring in the substitute and he gets to play instead. So Soaz got to play after all. He got to play 3 of the 4 games. Having played against both of them, now for a few splits, who do you actually think is the better top laner of the two at the moment? Obviously, Whipple wasn't playing top lane for most of the split, but, you know, this is the role he would have been in the final. So who was your money on as who the best of the two was?
I mean, I personally always felt like Soaz was better than Whipple because Fnatic was playing better with Soaz than with Whipple. That's how I felt. But, of course, on lane, like, I hear from my only thing I can hear is like from my top player, you know, like Bipo is better on lane, you know, he just has better mechanics, right? But how I see it is that in the grand picture, I don't think that matters. I think it matters is like to know like when to pull the trigger, how to play the map, how to like talk to your teammates in game and stuff, and how to just play general macro. And it's the same if like, especially like with Bipo, Fnatic plays a lot around top, whereas with Soaz, he's like most of the time left alone or he loses lane 1-on-1, doesn't matter, you know, because he's just he's like really good at doing that, you know, and he's just a really fucking good player. Like he's been in scene for so long, and so they could play more on bot. Like Soaz actually enables his team by just like letting them play around reckless more. That's something that happened in the final, I think, and something that happened and before, where at MSI, Fnatic was not really playing around bot at all, and they were not there. I felt like MSI, Fnatic was not their own self, like from the EU LCS, at least like in groups, that they were playing really, really worse than EU LCS, at least like their bot lane, bot jungle together. So that's what I think Soaz enables to Fnatic. Of course, I don't really know from outside perspective, but that's how I see it.
Kelsey, one of the things people did criticise Reckless for, aside from just not coming and actually playing in the LCS until the very end, was people wondered, did he actually have like a decent champion pool even? Because he is a player actually where, if you think back, actually, for his whole career, he's never really had a massive champion pool. There's been times when it was obviously very limited, but in some of the other teams, he was just in such great teams, no one was going to target his champion pool anyway. Did he actually have any limitations? Because obviously in this final, he just played 2 champs anyway, so it didn't really matter.
I think, obviously, you always have this idea of the champions that Reckless likes to play in mind, which are champions that can sideline, that can self-peel, and those types of champions. But at the same time, I feel like this season, because specifically what he was talking about, which was Caps was more consistently able to go to side lane and know when to group, and this type of thing where he didn't have to rely on that as much, we saw the opportunity for him to play more different champs, and I think we saw a wider variety of champs that he would play in Spring, for example. But he is definitely the kind of player who, if he goes into a game and he plays X champion, and he feels like he has a good game, or his team feels like he has a good game, he will continue to play that type of champion unless you specifically ban it. Because, like, obviously, his thoughts on things like, for example, the Kennen are that, you know, I should get an advantage from being able to play this type of thing better than anyone else can. And so I think that he is the type of
presumably
person
you weren't going to ban it out in that scenario.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's the type of person who will just continue to play what he thinks is the best champion to carry the game on, I think. So.
Okay. How would you rate the Kai'Sa performance, Perkz? I mean, as I said already, it is a champion that, like, a lot of really fucking good players, if they just take over the game with. So it's not like it's just Reckless or just Deft or whoever. Like, everyone who gets it is pretty insane on it. Well, how would you rate him on it in particular?
Well, I would say Reckless Kai'Sa in game 1 was like really shaky. He was like, it was obvious that he was like, it was her first game on stage. Like, I know how it feels. Like, the first game on stage is like, it's just a warm up anyways. So you have to like warm up and then play the next game. So for this game, it's like, it's a really solid like 2 out of 10. Like, really meh. But game 2 and game 3, it was like, I would give it like a good 9 out of 10. Like, it was really well played by him. I think after first game, I thought that he's like, actually like I don't know, really bad or something because they were like really hinting bot. Even though it's a hard matchup, right? They were still like really making like kind of rookie mistakes in how they trade and how they like. I remember they dying to a gank is like was really misplayed mechanically as well, and like just trades in general was really bad. So, but game 2 and 3, like he played really well, and of course his team is really good as well. So, but I have to give him credit, like he played really well this final.
Okay, what did you think, Kelsey?
There were like a few moments, like when he would go in for team fight and get caught up by Cho'Gath ult or Cho'Gath Q or something like this. Just really random stuff, but overall he played well. Like, I think one of the big things, as Perkz alluded to earlier, is that they played like these types of Kai'Sa, Cassio, Malzahar type comps to just be able to go to Baron and take it really, really fast as soon as it spawns, like this type of setup. And he played that role really well, and he, for the most part, navigated team fights very smartly, which is what they rely on. It's again like his laning isn't necessarily what they wanted, and Fnatic in most cases like actually kind of counterpicked their bot lane matchup. So yeah, it was basically what I've expected from him for most of his career. It wasn't like amazing like high tier Reckless that he kind of gained the reputation for in Spring, but it was definitely very good. So.
Okay. Right, Perkz, obviously the MVP of the split is Caps, and obviously everyone saw some amazing games from him during the whole split, and he had the crazy game where he played Vayne, which is obviously pretty impressive. Where would you rate Caps for this split? What did you think of him?
I mean, I think it's fair that he gets MVP. I expected him or Hildesheim to get MVP because they both played like super well, like almost every single game, right? So I don't know, he's just playing very well, and his team also plays really well around him, so he can play whatever the champ he wants because he can play them and because his team knows to play with him. So he's just really good. Yeah, that's all. I could like talk about him in depth, but I don't really know what to say too much because for me, it just feels like he's very good, and the other millers are like meh, and I don't feel anything when I play against anyone else. So. But yeah, So yeah, he's just very good.
Okay. Kelsey, was he the best mid?
Oh yeah, I think he was the best mid. It's actually really interesting how he's progressed as a player, because obviously, like, when he first came into Fnatic last year, he was very hit or miss, but he's found ways to channel his, like, up to 10 games, like his all-in risk games, very well. You still see moments where he goes, like, a little bit too ham, and it feels like very int, or his team is, like, overextending to play around him, and it feels like a lot of his success does come from his team adjusting to, like, some of the crazy plays he's willing to pull off. But the fact that, like, every once in a while, just in a team fight, you will see him say, oh, okay, he like did that play on Cassio to get the speed boost, like, really, really well, and that won the team fight or something like this. And you realize that he's just, like, thinking very smartly and very quickly in most situations, and it makes him come off, like, really, really well.
What about on the other side then, Perkz? Because obviously Nukeduck is another veteran player, long time, and people were impressed with his play this split, played a lot of different champions. It seemed to be one of the areas he excelled in. So where was Nukeduck at? Because you've obviously played him now a few seasons in a row.
Well, I feel like I still think Nukeduck is a very good player as well. I think that the only thing, like, he does a lot of stuff well. He will not, like, really... He doesn't really lose lane in 1-on-1, right? But I think that him and Amazing as a mid jungler, every time I play against them, I don't really feel any pressure. And I feel like that me and Jankos just play way better than them as a duo. And in scrims or on stage, it's both the same. Besides the one Gragas game, but we don't talk about that game. And yeah, I think Nukeduck is a good player. I don't know why he's played 20 different champions this split. That kind of, like, blows my mind. I think that was just for fun, just to show that he can. Like, he played 20 different champions, but he's, like, support and jungle played 1 or 2.
Exactly.
So, like, he had to, like, compensate, right, for them not playing more champs. And yeah, he's been very good for so long, and he's never reached. I mean, he's not reached the finals in season 3. So I'm actually, because I'm friends with him, I'm happy that he got to finals, and that I actually thought that Schalke was going to get out of qualify for Worlds, but we talk about third place later. Yes. So it will be fun to see him in Worlds, but unfortunately, like, I'm coming for the Gauntlet spot. I'm climbing the Gauntlet, and yeah, he might not make Worlds again this year, but he might will, so we will see that.
Okay. Now that we've seen the finals as well, Kelsey, where does Nukeduck actually rank for the season? Where do you think of him?
I mean, I do think he's a top 3 mid laner. I would put him a little bit behind Caps and Perkz, but overall, like, I think just people, because there's been so much hype for Upset and because Amazing has played very well, I just think and obviously VeXii has had, like, insane Poppy plays and everything else. I think people have talked, except for Deficio, of course, who doesn't, like, shut up about it, but people have talked about Nukeduck a little bit less than he deserves, because there is so much focus put on Nukeduck succeeding, and some of the reasons why he has played so many champions is because he's, like, been absorbing bans. When people had stopped kind of banning Aatrox, they were still banning it against Nukeduck, things like that. So, and then they rely on him being able to counterpick, which means, like, okay, maybe there could be 5 or 6 mid lane bans in this game, so he kind of has to dig a bit deep, and that allows people like Amazing, people like Upset, people like Vander to maybe at times kind of look like one tricks, because they get their best champions every game. And so, like, and obviously he might be the only pressure lane that they play to in a game the way that they draft. So it's a bit, I think he gets a lot of credit from my perspective for Schalke's success this split. So.
Perkz, obviously, since Fnatic has won and they're going to go to Worlds, we're going to see them represent Europe again, people want to believe that some Western team can be super good and can actually do something against Koreans and go deep, etc. Is Fnatic the team? Do you think they can do it? Okay, so I was actually thinking about this. I feel like Fnatic is pretty good as a team, but I'm really worried that when they go to Worlds and they play against Deft and Mata, Uzi and Ming,
Jackie Lau and Bao whatever, and they play against these bot lanes that their bot junglers are just gonna get so outplayed that it's not even gonna be funny to play the game. That's one thing I'm afraid of. I feel like as a team and as macro and as team fights, they can play as well as the Chinese. I mean, against Korea as Asians, but I just feel like that their bot lane is gonna struggle so much, and that's basically it. I think they have no chance. I was thinking about it, and they have no chance. Yeah.
What do you think, Kelsey?
I think it's interesting because obviously, like Yuzia and Ming, I think get a lot of praise for their laning, but in recent games, I feel like RNG and a lot of the best teams in Korea, even like KT to an extent, the final have struggled with their early game. So for me, I don't see it necessarily as like it's so definitive that Fnatic definitely lose every early game or anything like that. I think it's more likely that they miss a rotation or do a dumb collapse and then like they get overwhelmed in a team fight or something of that nature. Then they consistently lose early game. But I do think that they are not favored going into Worlds right now.
Okay. Because I do think one thing that's kind of cool about the team is that since they have shown that even when we moved out of the weird meta, they can obviously just sob in Whippo and Solas depending on what they want to do on what game. That's a pretty cool tool to have. No team really truly had that in the past in the West, you know, like even if you took a sob, it was just a sob. So that's interesting. You could give it a different look. And obviously that does mean, like the Koreans now, if one of them like is just playing really badly and like slumps it, well, you can just put the other one in. So you got an option there. That's pretty good. But my main concern is basically like Reckless and Broxer, because like, that's the thing. I don't know. Roxer does a good job, but he also has a fucking stacked team and has the whole time he's been there. So I'm not really sure, like, if he goes against, like, Score, if that fucking Tarzan guy gets that. I feel like these guys would just obliterate him completely. Even RNG's got some pretty good junglers. I don't know. That one's a tough one. And then, yeah, bizarrely, I don't even think it's a skill thing with Reckless. It seems like it's just a mentality thing. I don't know why. He just has that thing that some players do where if they think the other person's much better than them, it's like... Okay, what's great is there's a very famous StarCraft player called Idra from StarCraft 2, right, who had exactly this mentality. And his problem wasn't that he couldn't win the match. It's that if he respected an opponent as being better than him, anytime he made a tiny mistake, he thought that, like, the other person, because they're better than him, should just, like, completely close the game out. So to him, any small mistake he made was, like, game over. So it's like he actually beat himself. It wasn't, like, the other guy might have beaten him if it'd been a heads-up game, you know, but he could do it himself. I've seen Reckless do that way too many times against Uzi, specifically. Like, it's like, I don't know why, because he's played against other very good AD carries his whole career. He's played against Forgiven a billion times, you know. I don't know why he does it against that one guy, but he does. So that's always a worry when people have that sort of psychological aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing to talk about, and honestly, like, I really hope Fnatic does well, because I can see them doing well. But I just say no chance, because I can still like see how like Reckless, I mean how like Fnatic bot lane performed at MSI compared to like other bot lanes, and now I'm watching the bot lanes play. It's not even about only laning phase, like how they play with jungler and how they like move on the map and how they play is like, I just feel like those bot lanes are just better. But I hope to get proven wrong, because like Hylissang Spike was like really clean, so like maybe he can like pike it up with rolls or something. I don't know, like we will see. I think that like they can for sure do really well because of cups. So yeah.
See, here's my real hope for Worlds, is that the one thing that sucks about Worlds is that this is one of those weird things, right, where people don't realize, but actually the fact that Riot uses the region-based seeding, where you can't have like another Korean and, you know, the second Korean has to be in pool 2, even if they're like the best team in the world, that actually fucks Western teams even more, because it makes it even more likely that Chinese and Korean teams win their groups, because they're all divided up. Whereas like what I thought would have been cool is, listen, forget whether or not anyone could beat a Korean team, because in past years they couldn't, right? But it would have at least been cool to have seen, like, you know, Fnatic versus Cloud9 in a quarterfinals and see the whole series. But we never got that ever. It was always just Korean or Chinese team versus Westerners, and then them winning most of the time. So I actually thought that storyline just never happened. So I hope we at least see that. Like, I'd like to see, like, Team Liquid versus Fnatic in the quarters or something. That'd be fucking hype. That'd be
that would be really hype, but it requires one of them to get first seed.
It does need something of a miracle. I agree. Yeah, they either need the really lucky group or they need the other one to do some miracle shit. Yeah, that's the problem. It can happen though. It can happen.
World groups are just like, it's a coin flip. Honestly, you can one year you can get CLG and Albus Nox, and next year you can get the world champions.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Right, let's talk a little bit about the third game now. We don't have to go too much in depth. Obviously, the main aspect, as you said, Perkz, was that Worlds qualification was on the line, and most people thought, despite some of the flaws they showed against Fnatic, most people thought Misfits should win this series. You know, Vitality had a nice storyline, but especially once they lost the semi-final against Schalke, a lot of people basically thought, Perkz, that like the best teams were on your side of the bracket, and like Schalke had a good run at the end of the split, but nobody knew how they do in the playoffs. Yeah, so you know, those Vitality and Schalke had the good run at the end, but you never know how that translates to playoffs. So, were you shocked by this result?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, I expected Misfits to 3-0 Vitality, but like, because also them winning Vitality would kind of for sure secure us first seed in the Gauntlet. So it would be like easier for us a bit. I mean, even though I really love playing on stage, it's what I live for, right? So it's fun to play more games. Just makes it a bit harder for us, right? But that's okay. I want to just like the way Misfits played against Fnatic and against us. People were thinking like, wow, they're actually a really good team, right? And that they're one Hansama not jumping in away from taking the game and then tilting Fnatic because Caps picked the way in mid and almost lost the game alone. But he ended up carrying the game alone because it's Caps, of course. So not much you can do about that. I think that this team has like mental issues. I mean, how they phrase it, they have like mental block or maybe lack of trust. Like they play really well on one style that they do, and then they can only do that. And if they are not like winning really hard through bot lane, they cannot win games basically. So that is one thing that is really easy to prepare for and really exploitable. So like I think the Misfits will just go downwards from this. And maybe play them and we got fucked again, but I really think that I can see Splice winning against Misfits. Like, yeah, I don't know. If they lost to Vitality, then I can see everything happening now. So
okay. Kelsey, is this a bad result? Does it actually mean that Vitality's good? Is there a positive here?
I actually kind of went the other way, and I saw the Misfits beating G2 as more of a fluke than Misfits like suddenly being back, you know? So I actually did kind of expect Vitality to win this. I feel like Vitality and Misfits again have like similar problems, have problems at the same stages of the game. However, Vitality like work more cohesively in general. And so if you're in a position where, and the way that they adapted, which was like, for example, in the G2 series, you always had the option of like mid lane being able to get, like Perkz was picking Ryze early, so Senkox could pick a matchup that he was both super comfortable with and could play into Ryze, for example, like the Malzahar. Like Senkox has always sort of been known for, okay, this guy can at least play Malzahar, you know, even when like at the bottom of his career when he was not doing well at all. And I think that allowed them to kind of get a lot more momentum, where they wouldn't necessarily get momentum. I think Misfits have been drafting like really weirdly in a lot of situations where like they save their jungle pick to super late, and then they put a lot on Maxlore, who's like inconsistent on when he plays like carry picks on how he's positioning in team fights, and then just like the way that Misfits play towards top side, and they just have a lot of issues where if things don't go well for them, bottom line, as Perkz said, it's just like they have no other answer. So if you're constantly shutting that down, which you can if you get like a good mid lane setup, which Vitality consistently picked for in this series, then I feel like Misfits just don't have it. And so it to me, this was more of an expected result than I think for a lot of people. And yeah, I don't necessarily think that makes Vitality the best team to go to Worlds, absolutely, but it more than it says that Misfits kind of look like the worst team in the Gauntlet. So
okay. I mean, to be fair, Vitality wouldn't be going to Worlds if H2K had just won Game 5 in the spring, so
yeah, there you go.
Who do we really blame in the end?
Really,
you know?
whose fault is that?
It always comes back to the H2K somehow. I don't know how, but
imagine us going 2-16 in the regular season and still being able to play Gauntlet this year, Thorin.
Happened, right?
In summer.
Could have happened.
It could have happened. There you go.
Something broken about that system, I feel, but okay. maybe a slightly flawed system. Like,
yeah, I think so too, yeah.
when you were Kelsey was talking earlier about Jizuki in the context of like how he plays with the jungler. Like, what is he like as a mid laner? Because he seems like a bit of an unorthodox player.
I don't know, man. Like it's like so. First, when I was he would play in Spring Split when he debuted as in Spring Split. He would look so insane. Every game was like hardcore smurfing. I don't know, and I was like, okay, wow, is this guy like fake or something? And then I played against him, and he was like, he did absolutely nothing in the game. And I played against him next time, and he did fine. And every time I play against him in scrims, like he plays full aggro, maximum aggro, don't respect jungler, int most of the games, carry some games alone, right? Roam a lot, carry top a lot, like for his team. Like he just roams a lot. It's good. Like he's not bad, but it feels really coin flip. And I think he like is the biggest factor why Vitality won the series against Misfits. Like he was absolutely smurfing most of the games, and it was like I was like, wow, he's smurfing, but I couldn't do that. So maybe he's just really good, you know. I don't know. He's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Like Kelsey,
he's smurfing, but he's just okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how that's how I feel. But when I see him, he's like, wow, Italian stallion.
Sure. Like Kelsey, in this matchup, like I'll give you the Reddit analysis. So the Reddit analysis, this comment was mega upvoted as well, was like all Misfits had to do was put Hans Sama on an early game AD carry and then put Senkux on a roaming mid laner, but they didn't do that. Insert abuse. Yeah. So what do you think of that? What do you think of the Reddit analysis?
I think that that doesn't necessarily work in every situation that you want to draft for. And I'm guessing because they played like so much Lulu and stuff, this was the sort of thing that they'd been practicing. And they wanted to rely on doing something where they had like max floor carry or their bot lane carry. This was the type of style that they were going for more in spring of earlier this year, obviously, but it didn't work out for them then. So I'm not quite sure if this is a team where it's like they can't quite tell what works for them in scrims versus what works for them on stage or something along those lines. But it's just really weird to me that they really, really go for this when it has been difficult for them in so many instances and hasn't really yielded results. So I wouldn't necessarily agree just like put Hansama on an early game AD carry because I mean, they might be getting to places in scrims right now where they feel like they can't just rely on that. And I would say that against most teams in the LCS, if they just put Hansam on an early game AD carry, they probably will lose most of the matches because they won't be able to answer things like Kaiser or Tristana later. And they'll just like feel really confused. They won't be able to match like mid-game fights. And that's like really what they need to rely on to win because their macro is just like not up to par. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that analysis, no.
Okay. All right, Perkz, obviously you referred to it earlier, but your old teammate Kick has been back, and that's one of the storylines of why Vitality did this run and got to this position. Right, obviously he wasn't playing as a jungler in your team, he was the top laner at the time. So it's a bit
I play with him as a jungler as well.
Sure.
Like in Challenger Series, yeah, I play with him, yeah.
So what did you think changed in Vitality when he came in?
Well, he's just. I talked about him before a bit, and it's basically the same. What I still think is like he's very decisive, and he will do what he wants to do, and he will call his team what he wants to do. That's how he played on G2, and that's how he did with us. Like he would do so many. Like he was the most proactive top laner with TPs back then, and he would like do a lot of roams and engage a lot of fights for us. And we were like 8-0 with him or something when we started Summer Split, and I'm like so sure we would have gone like 36-0 with him that split. Like he was really fucking good back then, but he left, yeah. So that's what he brings to Vitality. Basically, he brings that decisiveness and that like early game leadership that maybe they didn't have as much with previous jungler, and he also brings, I feel like, a lot more mid game macro and late game macro than what Vitality had before. Like Vitality is now better at snowballing and pushing leads and basically playing around Baron and playing around Vision, because Hikis has been on good teams and he knows how this works. He's an experienced veteran, so I think that's what he brings to the team. But it was also like his tanks are like so meh. Like his Gragas and Sejuani and stuff are like So I feel like he's kind of like one-dimensional of this like early game. I think both him and Jizuka are really bad at playing like losing matchups mid jungle or like just not hard winning matchups. So I feel like that Misfits could have like exposed them in draft there, but didn't. So they were like kind of trolling a draft.
Okay, what do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think Kikis is a really interesting player because most people think of him as this like weird, crazy jungler who kind of came up with Unicorns of Love, but he's been around playing League of Legends for ages. Like he was in the very first World Cyber Games in 2011, like playing for the Polish team. So he's just been kind of like around for ages, and maybe he hasn't always been at the highest level, but he's like, his career is kind of like a roller coaster, you know, where he almost makes it back up to the top. And it's like that kind of player shows an amazing amount of dedication to just like go all the way down to bottom, like look like shit at a tournament like EU Masters, and then still like really, really perform well. And I assume like an LCS triad or something like this, and then just keep playing and not take it bad. And then even on Mysterious Monkeys, he was saying that like he can prove that he can really play all these things and everything else. So I think that kind of like tenacious player will always have something to offer, right? He will always like have like something really, really valuable to bring to the team, whether it's shot calling or like being a team player or anything, maybe even later if he transitions to coaching or something like this. But like he's one of the most interesting players in EU, I think, if you really go into that. And I'd really like to see someone like do a retrospective on his career at some point. But yeah, so for me, like Kikis isn't the most mechanical player, but I can't see a team that's just like significantly worse for having him on it, or doesn't like have some aspect of it improved because he's on the roster over like some other player, you know. So
obviously there is still quite a while until Worlds, but since we now know Vitality also is going, Perkz, how would they do you think against international competition?
Well, they're second seed, right? So second seeds, I think they will get a bit unlucky. I have this feeling that they're gonna get like, I don't know, first from Korea or like first from NA and third from. I honestly that can be against every NA team. Let's skip NA. But maybe they get like honestly.
Vitality can beat Team Liquid.
Yeah, sure. They're sure. Like that, I can see their mid jungler just rolling over Team Liquid Millionaire and taking over the game like that. I mean, Welter played fine in the finals, but like his team was like so good, you know. I mean, many things can happen, and it's hard to say right now. But if they get a good group, I can see them even making a group. But if they get like two Asian teams, there is like absolute no way they can win against those. So yeah, that's what I think.
Kelsey?
It sounds like you're just down on EU's chances if they get into a group with two Asian teams in general, you know?
Yeah, so. I am. Like, I mean, I still think Fnatic has a chance, like, even though my exact words were no chance. They have, like, more chances than other European teams. I think because of their fundamentals as a team, like, their basically perception of playing the game after 15 minutes and the way they play, they can match that with the teams of Asia, but I don't think that Vitality has, like, as I said, every other youth team could have that and could improve in Worlds Bootcamp, but this is like years of effort. This is like 2 years of effort, and every other youth team is just too inconsistent to actually counter that. Like, including us, we could play good if we make Worlds, and we could also play very bad. I can see both things, you know, and as for Fnatic, I can see them just playing good after 15 minutes, you know, so yeah, that's how I see it.
I've been watching like the LPL playoffs, obviously, and there are certain matchups that I would want to see. Like, I think like Rogue Warriors versus Vitality would be an interesting game if both of those teams go. I don't necessarily think there's like definitively. It's almost like Vitality and Rogue Warriors are in some ways like the opposite teams. So I think that would be really interesting and maybe not as straightforward. But in general, I don't think Vitality's chances are that good, right? Like, I don't see them going like 0-8 in their group or whatever, or 0-6, but I don't see them making it out either. So
okay. Thing is, I think there was actually some stat that someone once brought up, because obviously there was the famous one in season 5 where everyone thought Cloud9 was going to go 0-6 in that group, where like it was all the good, like Fnatic, IG, etc. But I think there was some stats someone brought up, which I'd have to double check. But I believe no Western team ever has lost every single game. I think everyone's at least always won one anyway. So the weird thing is no one ever does quite as badly as you think, no matter what. And then again, to be fair, you do get a wild card. So unless you get really unlucky, still a chance to win that game. I can't see a world in which Vitality's beaten any of the Asian teams, though.
I actually do wonder, obviously it's a gigantic joke, with less of a break between first stage and second stage of the round robin, how much of an effect does that have? Because I actually do think that traditionally EU teams have, adapted very well with time, So yes. I'm kind of wondering if there will be, a more even matchup between EU and NA because of that or not, obviously, I think especially based on how we're seeing some of the NA teams play right now, EU does look more favored than they have in some of the past worlds, but I actually think it might have an impact. So I would be curious to hear what Perkz has to say about that.
I agree with you, but for example, I think Vitality is the opposite. I feel like Vitality will have more chance in the first round robin before teams see how they play, because they are actually a different beast. They are different than other teams. They really heavily rely on winning early game. There's a stat that I won 17-2 when I had a 15, and they lost every single game behind a 15. It's absolutely crazy. They cannot win from behind. So there's just such an interesting team to actually play against. So I think that I can see them even going 3-0 in the first week of groups, and then maybe going 0-3 in the second week. I think they are the only team that will suffer from that adaptation, from that 2 weeks round robin, or basically, I don't know if it's 2 weeks or 10 days or something, but
it's 8 days. I think.
Yeah. So I think that they will actually suffer from it. That's what I think. But we will see. Maybe they will surprise us and me.
I think that's a good point, because if anything, adding Kikis allowed Vitality to have this jolt when teams are kind of figuring out some of their gimmicks, so that they change suddenly, and then it's they needed almost that roster change to start doing something a little bit different, So I think it's worth saying that Vitality come in shocking people, but then if you calm down and watch some of their games, you can kind of figure out how they play and form strategies against them. So, and they don't really change that much.
Yeah, they just change their early game picks, right? But their early game play is the same. So maybe they can play games of early game, and then you know what they play, because they will probably not play same as in EU LCS as playoff, right? But they will play the same style, that's for sure. I can't see without changing to late game AD carries, team fighting. That's not gonna happen. You just can't see that happening. So, yeah.
Okay, we're back for the second half, which is gonna be the North American part of it. If this format keeps going, we might continue with it. I don't know. The problem is, it does mean you have to be it's better for playoffs. I think you have to the problem is you have to kind of streamline it a bit more to talk about the actual games, whereas everyone knows. We do have episodes where if I feel like the game's not that interesting, we do just go on a tangent for 45 minutes. And then I just look at what happens is I look on OBS and I see 53 minutes and we haven't even got past the guests team. Shit. And then I just awkwardly try and cover a game in 10 minutes. So Croissant, here's the thing. As you've been on this show, I feel like it reminds me actually of when a young Kelsey Moser first came on the show, and when Scrilluminati came on the show, because the viewers got to sort of learn and grow with them as they saw their careers progress, as they moved up to bigger and better things, as their look transformed, they got more comfortable on camera, they opened up emotionally and really embraced their role as entertainers. You're actually on a team now, right? You work with a team.
Yeah. I'm the strategic coach for OpTic. I started off as head of analysis, but my role kind of transitioned. So
mostly because Riot imposed someone has to be on stage, and therefore strategic coach is now an official title.
Oh, right. I see.
Yeah, but I think it's also because
that did sound like that. You just went to them could I have a pay rise? And they were like, no, but we can give you a better title. You're now the strategic coach. Thanks. Yeah, go on, tell us.
It's pretty funny because OpTic hired me around April or May, and I was still finishing up school, and they went to boot camp in Korea and everything. So I didn't actually fly in until the team had already been together for 2 or 3 weeks. Came into LA or Santa Monica at the beginning of June, and they told me that I could choose whatever title I wanted for myself. So I was just head analyst, whatever. But then people started telling me that analyst is just like a derogatory term, that I shouldn't really do that. And then I worked more and more with the players, and a lot of analysts, they like message the players and they're remote. They don't really even get FaceTime or conversations with the players. And so I was working with the players every single day from morning to night. And so I was just like, strategic coach seems to be what other coaches are calling themselves. And that's the title that I was kind of given as well. But the thing about the new rule that Riot implemented was a lot of teams didn't actually utilize it and didn't bring coaches on stage. I think even in the finals, I didn't see Rapid Star with Reaper on stage doing pick and ban. So that was a pretty interesting thing. But
what do you think about that then? Like is it the case that because you can do it, like two heads are better than one and all that, and you should give it a go just because what's the negative? Or do you think for some of these people, like in Reaper's case, does he just want to do it all himself and not have anyone input? Like, what's your take on it?
So there are definitely cons to having another person on stage. You would think that that's not the case because the person could just stand up there and not say anything, right? So at bare minimum, it should be the same as the previous status quo. But people often feel, when I was first on stage in week 7, there were times where I felt like I should be saying something, but it's just, even I've listened to comms before I was actually picking and banning on stage, right? And sometimes players would talk over each other, or the coach wouldn't be able to get his point entirely across. And for you to add a 7th person on top of all of those 6, like, things can be, people will have ideas and not all of them will be good ones, right? So it takes actually a lot of skill and practice to find out what the best formula is. And I don't know what C9 has done on their end, but Reaper doesn't really need a translator. And like, a lot of teams were saying that TSM and Liquid really benefited from this change because their coaches like Song could get translated for by Lustboy. But that seems pretty stupid to me, because like, the person would have to say all of their thoughts in Korean and then get that repeated. And there's really not that much time on stage. So unless they just have like tons of downtime or like empty space that they weren't using before, it doesn't seem like that factor of added communication would be useful. I have specific things that I try to do while Zabatine is talking to the players. Like, I'll write things down and think about exactly what I want to say to the jungler, or what I want to say to maybe a bot laner. If the enemy team picked a bot lane matchup that was unique, like a Twitch or something, then I would give my thoughts on that. And I would make sure that I didn't ramble on, right? Because viewers of this show in the past know that I have some trouble with that at times. So, but if I collect my thoughts and I know what I'm going to say in 15 seconds, then I can communicate those ideas in a way that Zabatine definitely couldn't. So that's like the advantage of a strategic coach, right? But a lot of teams, I'd say the majority of teams in North America right now, are not utilizing that second coach on stage very well yet. And it's understandable because the infrastructure is new, whereas teams in Korea have had like 2 to 4 coaches constantly in the booth. Sure. And they don't even have headsets on, right? So I can have a full-on conversation. I could technically have a full-on conversation with the top laner, separate from what the head coach is doing. But in NA, you can't do that because you're all on the same communication line. And so that makes it, again, the benefits of having a strategic coach on stage are not immediately obvious.
Okay. Come on, Kelsey, you must have some thoughts on this as someone who indeed was an analyst, and that has been used as a derogatory term against you at times.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting because I remember on the show we had Peter on, and he said, do you consider yourself more of an analyst or a coach? And it's like, well, I don't really know, like the way Croissant explained it, coaches seem to be calling themselves this, so I guess I'll call myself this. Like, this kind of like, I don't think titles are really as defined as maybe a lot of people think they are, because sure. like Croissant, I worked with players morning to night and stuff like this, so it was like, but I still called myself an analyst just because I didn't necessarily feel like I was a specific anything, and that was the title I was given, so it was fine. And then in terms of being on stage, yeah, like I feel like it would be super easy to just kind of disrupt the communication, but there are a lot of ways that a second coach could be useful, because there have been times where I've been off stage where there's might be like one thing that they're not paying attention to that I'd want to interject or something like this. Or there might be like something where like they're focused on the draft, but I can like the strategic coach or the second person could think, okay, how is the comp coming together, like on the enemy team side and on my side, and like how can we like tell the players how to play that out whenever all the champions are picked. So that could be a very useful use of the strategic coach, because they'd be focusing on like kind of getting the matchups and the synergies right, and then like having like specific setups in different stages, but like big picture stuff at the end could be a very good use of strategic ghosts. Obviously we don't have that in Europe, but these are the kinds of things that I was thinking of when it came in NA, and I could see how some teams might not get the most of it or might not know how to implement it because the time is like really, really brief on stage. So.
Okay. By the way, when that week where you actually had to fill in for veteran and you went on stage and you did the pick bands, was it actually different than you expected being on stage? Did it like affect how you thought about the pick bands, etc.?
It wasn't that different because like that week I had been leading scrims, so it kind of went the same as that because obviously the time periods are very similar and stuff like this. And I already had like a good thought in mind of how it was going because I'm always at the studio and I'm listening to how it is. Right. So it went more or less as I kind of thought it would. So,
did you like that video that person made where it was like you were like all electricity coming out your brain?
Yeah,
it was pretty funny.
It was a funny video, and I didn't retweet it because I didn't necessarily think like I am that person. So.
I think it was just a joke.
Yeah, obviously it was just a joke, but I didn't retweet it. It was like, but yeah, like obviously it was. I appreciated it, and I got a chuckle out of it. My players, at least some of my players, thought it was funny. So, yeah.
Oh, listen, if you're a H2K player, I would recommend doing what Jankos used to do to Ryu all the time, which is just, he used to just leave the Faker versus Ryu 1v1 clip playing every time Ryu left his PC, so he'd come back and just see that and be like, what the fuck is it? So I would just recommend to H2K players, if you just want to have a little bit of fun, just open that up and then, you know, just lighten up Kelsey's day. Just remember the good times. Right, what about this then? As we talk about the final of the NA LCS, this was actually one where I felt like when I was reading all the Reddit threads leading up to it, I think people actually were pretty split on this one. Like a lot of people thought, in fact, I noticed even after the final, some people think Cloud9 might do better than Team Liquid at Worlds, obviously different matchups, but there was a lot of people thought Cloud9 had the chance to beat Team Liquid. Coming into this, Croissant, where were you putting yourself?
So I live tweeted a lot of the last couple of series for NA LCS playoffs, and I definitely thought Liquid was the favored person coming in, but I know the players on Cloud9 better. I know their management and staff better, and I also scrimmed against them a lot more often, so I knew that Cloud9 had special pocket picks that could be really influential on stage, but they ended up just falling really flat. And I think that the matchup was people were talking up Cloud9 way too much coming into or through the end of the split. They were saying it was really the narrative created by a lot of the casters, in my opinion.
Sure.
Where they were saying that Cloud9 looks like the best team in North America, etc. But if we take a look back at like all of the team's performance in playoffs, TSM got to play 15 games, right? 3 best of 5s. Each of them went to Silver Scrapes, and they went 8-7. But Cloud9 actually only got to play 8 games. They had the 3-2 against TSM, and then the 0-3 against Liquid. So their record is actually the worst out of anyone's, out of all the 6 teams in playoffs other than FlyQuest. And I think that it was pretty premature for a lot of people to expect Cloud9 to be able to match up against the consistency that Liquid has had over, the entire year and over all of the regular splits. And it's really, it's impressive to see how Cloud9 made their way up from 10th, right? We were tied, OpTic was tied with Cloud9 at one point for last, and we both made our grinds up. But even though we had resurgences, we were finding out how to gel with the team and what things were working, it's still like you have fewer cards in your hand than a team like Liquid does, right? A team like Liquid could have struggled in the middle of the split and looked worse, but they still pull out the Aurelia that they hadn't played in a really long time, and Pobelter was confident on it. They talked about like how the sports psychologist helped Pobelter, Ole, you know, and so I think that even looking forward, you mentioned that some fans think that Cloud9 will even do better than Liquid at Worlds. I think North America's number one hope should definitely be Liquid, and anything else that comes along the way with Cloud9 or 100 Thieves or, you know, TSM Echo Fox will just be, it'll be serendipitous, or it'll be really, you know, people shouldn't expect anything out of these teams as of right now.
When you said, though, that you scrimmed against Cloud9 a lot more with the OpTic team, I noticed even Doublelift actually said that, basically alluded to the fact that, like, in scrims, people were saying the Cloud9 team was super strong. And I have noticed, by the way, in terms of casters, both in League of Legends and even in my own game, CSGO, if casters ever hear scrim hype, a lot of them just instantly transition it into their actual, like, on-stage analysis. And, like, this team's looking really strong, you know? Whereas, personally, I tend to, like, ignore that. It's more like, well, how were they winning, you know? Like, you never know from that. So were they gods in scrims, Cloud9?
I actually wouldn't say they were straight up gods, and I think that maybe what Peter was saying is him just being very
trying to find a way to be nice or something.
Yeah, be nice and just be like, also, you know, patting himself on the back. Look, we smashed this team that we didn't expect.
That's a good move, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we 3-0'd them and they were fucking good. One of the best teams I've ever played, if I'm being honest. So.
Yeah. But I think Liquid's actually, I mean, I don't have a huge sample size from my scrims against Liquid, but I would say they're better at adapting than Cloud9 over the course of 6 games. And one example is we 3-0'd Team Liquid, like, really fast in the morning in the scrim block. And then afterwards, we didn't like troll or do anything particularly different. We also tried to adapt to what Liquid was doing, but they smashed us even harder 3-0 in the second half. Whereas Cloud9, we usually start off losing, and then we like start to pick up towards the end of the day. But maybe it's because Cloud9 like isn't as consistent or structured, or they start trying new things towards like 5th and 6th games. But I mean, I don't have any way of knowing exactly how the teams approach scrims, but Team Liquid just seems to have the best structure and best, you know, systematic approach to improving as an organization that I've seen from North America ever.
Okay, Kelsey, what was your kind of preconceptions going into the final?
Yeah, I think I said on the last episode that I even expected TSM to beat Cloud9 in the semifinal, so I was a little bit surprised that a lot of people were really, really hyping up this matchup, because I do think that Team Liquid came in as the heavy favorites. I think that Team Liquid actually, I had so many criticisms of how Team Liquid played and like moving on waves early and stuff like this. And to an extent, they still do a little bit of that, but I think that like even they acknowledged at MSI that them playing sides and stuff like this was things that they really needed to look at. And the way I look at Team Liquid play like mid to late macro relative to the rest of NA now is just like really, really far ahead in most cases. So I do think that Team Liquid should be considered like the best team in NA by a good margin. The same way that we just like talked about Fnatic a little bit ago in EU. So.
One of the areas, Croissant, I noticed that I think is part of the reason, like the most obvious reason why people hyped Cloud9 is because they had a winning streak, and anytime that happens, people get really excited and think it's going to continue, etc. But beyond that, for me, it was the fact that because they'd done all these roster moves over the split, and they'd actually managed to make the substitutions like a proper rotation where, you know, people actually did come in and out depending on what the game was and what they wanted to do. People seemed to really hype like all aspects of that. So they thought it like gave them more depth and they could do different things. So for example, when they won the TSM series, even though people spent the whole fucking split going crazy about Blabber, about how he's like the future of their jungle, etc., all of a sudden they were loving it when Svenskeren came back in and when Golden Glue came back in. And I have to say, that narrative killed me, as people saw by me doing a video. Because when I watched that game 4, I wasn't like, holy shit, Golden Glue. I was like, Svenskeren was the one who had the more impact, it looked like. Like, he did a pretty good job when he came in. So people presumably thought this might have an impact on the final. Like, you know, they'd be able to change up the lineup, and in doing so, maybe that would change how the team played, etc. Did you actually think that the 7-man rotation or whatever they were running, was it good? Did you think that it had this like benefit? So,
yeah, I definitely thought that. I didn't think it was enough to help Cloud9 overcome Team Liquid, but in a series where the teams had a closer levels coming into it and like more equal drafts and preparation, I think that it can definitely make the difference for sure. And while I don't think Golden Glue should instantly be considered at the same level as someone like Pobelter, who has shown consistency over the course of so many splits and been like the native mid talent. I personally think that I respect Golden Glue. When C9 was first making the roster swaps and when they like benched their star 3 players at the very beginning of the split, I was pretty vocal about my support for the decision. I really understood like the rationale behind it and why Reaper did it, even though I personally might not have done the same things. And I think it did pay off for them going up towards the end of the split. It just wasn't enough. But like, look towards Worlds. There's good news and bad news for Cloud9 fans if Cloud9 wins the Gauntlet and makes it to Worlds. It's that, I mean, they won't be able to utilize their 7-man roster at Worlds. Yes, it will be 6 players. But I know that it's very likely for Jack to bring all 10 players to Korea from the academy and from the main team. And so they'll still be able to, unlike in years past, I think they'll have a lot more things prepared to surprise teams in the group stage, because they'll be able to do more internal testing without having to rely on other North American teams or Korean teams, Chinese teams, etc. And so I do think, like, although you couldn't see it really happen in this series, Golden Glue and Sven coming in wasn't about Golden Glue being superior to Jensen, but it really is about, I don't think the coaching staff or the players on Cloud9 that weren't subbed in, that were like talking about how it affected them, I don't think they're just paying lip service to this narrative about Golden Glue when they say that it really brought a new energy. And like, when you just look at the personality types, it's speculation, right? But Jensen, Blabber have distinctly different personalities from Sven and Golden Glue, and from what I know about like hanging out with them, interacting with them. And I think when people say that there's nothing that Golden Glue could do that Jensen could not, that they're just really missing the point. They don't know how a lot of the interpersonal and like team dynamics are influential. And so I would just say that Cloud9 did a good job and have shown really what an academy team should be used for in the future, and for hopefully a lot of franchises, if a lot of franchises use the teams even like, you know, half as effectively as Cloud9 did this split, then you can expect North America to improve over Season 9.
I mean, by the way, that part about like the line you said, which was the logic people used of like, there's nothing Golden Glue can do that Jensen can't. It's like, first of all, that doesn't make sense, because again, I always make this point. It's not like a linear power chart where he's at like 6 and Jensen's at 8, so Jensen has all of 6 and 2 more. Like, he could have skills in a different area, and even beyond that, just team chemistry obviously runs on personalities as well. So we've seen in history there are lineups that on paper objectively look worse, but it's cause, you know, we just don't know that player, Bengi, whoever it might be, just maybe has a different personality, maybe he brings a different atmosphere, maybe even isn't as skilled and therefore does something else to help someone else out that he can't know, obviously. Anyway, Kelsey, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, and then another thing, obviously, it's almost like at this point a joke where Golden Glue is a scrim god and he's like really good, and Jensen specifically wanted him because he wanted to play against him, but he could never perform on stage. Like, as much as I do condemn Golden Glue for having poor stage performances, but he's never had like the full split to run it out, right? He's never had the time to actually get that out, because you see players like Upset, people are talking about, oh, he could have been as good as Reckless or whatever. And last split, he had insane stage fright, like the entire split basically. Okay. And it took a really long time for him to kind of get to the spot where he is now. And so I think that is something to say for Golden Glue if you're a player who is constantly told that like you choke on stage and then you're constantly removed as soon as it happens. It's really hard to get to a point where you're fixing those problems, I think. So it's good from my perspective that if Cloud9 really do see something in him, that they're really just kind of allowing him to continue to get stage games, even if the rest of the community is super down on him. So
I will say though, like, I by the way, that's something I even said in my own video. Like, the difference is when you're just the sub, like when he was on Dignitas and Echo Fox, like, yeah, that is a rough scenario because first of all, you know you're not even a real player in the team. Like, as soon as they get the other guy back, you're going to be out. And as you say, you don't really get the full split to bed yourself in. But that's actually where I think the crux of it lies. Because in the Cloud9 move, the logic here really does appear to be like the fucking Bengi Blank scenario where it's like, right, well, we'll let Blank play sometimes because then he knows if he loses the game, like he's not going to lose the whole series because Bengi comes in and he'll like clutch it out, etc. And they're trying to clearly do that now in this scenario where it's like, well, you've always got Jensen, we can always bring him in, it's not all on you. But that's also where, like, for me, the rotation part has to be really good because otherwise, if I'm Golden Glue, if he actually has improved and he has gotten over these issues, then it doesn't make sense to try and be on Cloud9 because you're not going to be the full-time starting mid laner. Like, you, if anything, someone like Golden Guardians, these are the teams that were ideal for someone like this to go and join, you know, because then they're not going to sub you out. You'll get the whole split. If you actually are good, in fact, you'll even prove it more because you're on a bad team, you know, people will give you all the props. So, yeah, I think that's a tough one on that one. Because here's the thing, Croissant. Logically, if they can only take one player, I mean, logic would dictate it has to be Svenskeren, right? It has to be the jungler to give like a different look. It seems implausible you take Golden Glue. Would you disagree?
Well, it definitely depends on what Cloud9 sees, and in the next couple, I don't know if they're. It depends on how the gauntlet goes, because if preparation, Blabber might look great in scrims, but perform he might have the same problems that Golden Glue has on stage, right? For these best of series. And right now, if I had to make a decision, I would take Sven, Jensen, and Golden Glue instead of Blabber, because I personally think that, like, I'm not sure about the meta moving forward. Maybe the jungle is going to shift up so that there will be like starkly different kinds of picks. Maybe things like Nidalee, etc., could come back into the meta, whereas mid lane stabilizes more. But it depends, right? If mid lane has more Kassadin, has more specific champions, then the difference between like learning three mid lane champions for Jensen and 3 mid lane champions for Golden Glue is like that. That's a more powerful tool than having 2 junglers that play like Hecarim and Trundle and Sejuani versus Lee Sin, Trundle, Sejuani, etc. Okay. Right? But yeah, I think just right now, I personally think Golden Glue would be more useful to me in a 6-man than Blabber, but it definitely is up in the air.
The only thing is, when you describe that scenario there, I feel like the one flaw with the current system of how you sub people is that you have to say who it is before the draft starts.
Yeah,
so it's like if you could do it after the draft, it'd be wicked, like you're saying here, because you could just go all over the jungle. You know, they wouldn't know like what you were going to pick for mid. The problem is though, if you put like Golden Glue, well, yeah, he's probably not going to be playing like fucking Irelia, is he? That's probably just not going to be his pick at that point.
Yeah, that's interesting because Buipo said in one of his interviews that like he and Soaz have very different playstyles, right? Buipo characterized himself as being a top laner that always pushes for advantages, fights on every CS, has an aggression that he can't even turn off, right? It's a switch and it's always on. Whereas he characterized Soaz as someone who is just, more experienced, more used to, is willing to play a certain style for the team. And to me, it was like, okay, I mean, that sounds like a liability, or it sounds like something, it's just an interview, right? But if it's true, then technically you could exploit it where, okay, Buipo's in, then we're just going to play, to topside. We're going to try and abuse him as much as possible if we know he's going to play this certain style. Or if Soaz is in, then we're just going to get a stable matchup and then try to influence the game or the map elsewhere. So yeah, it's definitely like teams will talk about the value of these substitutions and the different playstyles, but it all depends on how effectively the enemy team can respond to these different adaptations in a series, which is not actually which might seem easy, but can be difficult for a lot of teams if they don't have the right preparation. And because teams like Cloud9 may play Quinn, and other teams know that the Quinn is coming, but if they're not, they still don't have enough experience playing against it. Perhaps if they didn't get the right scrims with the right partners. So yeah.
I think there are also nuance to those kind of expectations because, like you said, if you play Bwipo, you expect people to kind of exploit that in a top style play, and then so you maybe draft for something else on the matchup. It's like, okay, if he's absorbing so much pressure, I can play something like Kai'Sa in the bot lane, and we make more effective trades. Like if I play like Kai'Sa Braum, then you can actually get a lot of power level 3 out of that. You know that their jungler is probably going to be top. Like things like that can be really surprising and really useful in that scenario. So like there are a lot of layers to that as well. I agree with him when he said that he would take Jensen Golden Glue, but my reasoning is more, and Svenskeren, but my reasoning is more that, and I used this for RNG before, so I was kind of surprised to see them do MLXG and Carson do so well. I feel like all of Cloud9's player rotations right now are really rough, but it's sort of harder to cement a jungle rotation in a shorter period of time because the way your jungler plays changes the entire dynamic of the way the team plays, from communication, from like early game setup, like what style the jungler is more comfortable playing, and then so how the laners have to adapt because obviously jungler is a team role. And so changing out the jungle and making this transition really smooth, I feel requires way more practice, way more conditioning than a mid lane swap out might. So I think that Cloud9 are better off in a shorter time period, like really, really nailing down the kind of transition they want Jensen and Golden Glue to look like in time for Worlds. So.
Yeah, and really quickly to that point.
You don't have to be quick, mate. Just take as long as you want.
It's definitely true that would take more, it would be more difficult to cement the different styles, but there is more payoff likely because people always talk about how a substitute can be backstage and be with the coach like Reapered and like, you know, looking at weaknesses in the own team or exploit things that are exploitable in the enemy team. And the jungler has more influence on that than, let's say, like, I mean, Cody Sun or Akara in backstage. They're just going to be laning bot. So, and there's a limitation to how much these players can also communicate. But yeah, if Blabber was able to bring Reaper's brain into the game, or vice versa for Sven, and switch it up, then there's definitely more payoff to it than switching out Jensen or Golden Glue for the same reasons IMO.
Because another angle I just, again, as an outsider would pick is the other reason why I personally would use the junglers as the subs is, like, if I have to pick between the two of them, as we've already seen now, like, if they use Blabber and they pick him as, like, just the jungler and he knows, like, I'm playing every game, the last thing you ever want at Worlds is to find out that, like, your jungler's just going to tilt off the face of the earth when he loses, like, the first 2 games. You're like, great, we've got 4 more of these games. Like, I'd much rather have, like, the experienced backup to come in to save you there, whereas, like, that's not really the reason why you're bringing Golden Glue in the game. You know, you're bringing him in to just play a specific type of champion in a specific way and let other people, presumably Licorice, carry the game in that particular sense, you know. So, I don't know. I guess you can go either way on it. It's more what Reaper wants from this.
Yeah.
What about this then? So, before we talk about Team Liquid a bit more, what did you, since everyone focuses on Blabber, Golden Glue, and Svenskeren, what did you actually think of Jensen in this series? I mean, back in the days, obviously Jensen was considered MVP candidate, maybe even should have won one of those. Like, yes, he's not playing literally 1v1 against Paul Belter, but people was really, like, because the timing of when I made that video about Paul Belter, everyone was like, you shouldn't have done this now, he's fucking shit, like, he's fallen off, he's getting smashed. So, what did you think of Jensen in this series?
Sorry, when you said that you did a video on Paul Belter or on Jensen and people were saying that
it was just about Paul Belter.
Okay.
Yes.
And
I stressed like the historical element of, he just plays safe, just does his job, consistent player. He's not going to carry the game, and therefore lets your other lanes carry. And that's actually turned out in the end in NA to be a pretty good quality to have in a player. Hence all the titles that have followed him around. Even though yes, he probably was never the best mid.
Yeah, I think people still have Jensen and Bjergsen in their minds as these EU mids that are reminiscent of someone like Caps, but it's just not the case, right? Like, people were really upset that TSM put Bjerg on Zilean for how many games in the third place match?
Quite a few.
4 out of 5, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, and again, this was a narrative pushed by the analyst desks and the NA production, which is, why are you not putting Bjergsen on a carry? He is good on Zilean. He is, in fact, very good at Zilean. Blah, 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 point and click, Q spell, etc. But it's not enough, and his team cannot play around that pick. And I think that's just, it's a really, it actually bothers me a lot whenever I hear those kinds of points being made, because no, TSM definitely, or these teams have decided through scrims that Bjerg is, not only is Bjerg good on the Zilean, and comfortable on it, but his team can play well around it. And you saw that it like paid off for TSM at the end, because the Zilean Sion combo is just incredibly powerful. You have this engage that like Zilean in conjunction with someone who can just run at the enemy team is a winning formula in a lot of cases, and is just a powerful combo. But like, if Akali, Aurelia, and like 3 other mids are off the table, there is like, I don't know what people want Bjergsen to play. I don't know what people want Jensen to play, because they wanted Jensen not on Malzahar. They wanted him on a carry. But the reality is that Jensen plays Orianna. He plays Syndra. He's not busting out Vayne mid. He's not busting out something really special. If people want that, then this doesn't go, like, it isn't a problem with C9's pick and ban. It's a problem with their preparation for the last 3 weeks or the last, several months. They haven't been working on these pocket picks and practicing them every day in solo queue or in scrims in the way. And when we do see something like it from Bjergsen, it's like a Vel'Koz, which he has favored and which he's been trying to make a powerful part of his repertoire for like a couple of seasons now. And so I think that it's really misguided when people criticize teams like Cloud9 or TSM or even 100 Thieves for not putting Someday on carries, when he really only plays Gangplank nowadays, right? And Jax in very specific matchups. He doesn't pull out a Camille. When I'm working with Dokla, I try to find specific picks like Yorick or like Camille into certain matchups. And it takes a lot of confidence. It takes a lot of preparation to make those picks work. And it's not a kind of switch up or a mix up that you can do in a series. And you just have to expect as a fan that someone like Jensen will play a Cassiopeia into a Ryze, and he'll get a 10 CS lead by like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but he will not carry the game. He doesn't have it in him. And maybe it's like, also, I mean, there are definitely weaknesses, and it's more important for people to be focusing on the way that Xmithy is playing, and he's pressuring Licorice and getting these ganks off, and how Licorice may be underperformed in the series, than Cloud9 not enabling Jensen to play a certain pick. I thought Jensen did his job and played the game as well as he could, but I don't think that he's a superstar mid laner. I think he's very consistent, a very, very good player, but he's not the same kind of player that he was when he was dominating North America.
Thoughts, Kelsey?
Yeah, I'm formulating a thought.
Yeah,
I do. So one thing is that I don't necessarily think that like these players aren't strong players because they're more effective on Zilean, for one thing. So like I would say that Jensen and Bjergsen are still like a really, really high level North American mids. Like I didn't put them on the same level as Caps and Perkz before. I don't put them on the same level as Caps and Perkz now, but I do think they're like really, really stand out in NA. So I think that that's worth pointing out. I also like, for me, it's less like all of that and more just so much of the criticism of these games on the analyst desk or anywhere just tends to be focused on pick and ban, when I feel like there's so many other problems with these games that people could be focusing on that are obviously like linked in how draft is going, but it's like fundamentally the way that you're thinking about the game is going to inform draft. So if you see teams making mistakes in the game, I feel like it's putting the cart before the horse to say, oh, you need to completely change this pick, because if you're not thinking about the game in a way that would allow a different sort of pick to be the better choice, then that's the problem that you have to address. So if you want to criticize your draft, you could say, okay, so what happened in this game that made this pick not effective? So what happened to make Zilean in your mind not effective? Was it that Bjergsen wasn't like creating this huge pathway through mid that allowed the enemy jungler to invade and do all this other crazy shit? Well, TSM don't play like that. So is that a problem in the way TSM are playing? Is it a problem within like how they understand the game? Do they have to change their mid lane pick only after they change their style? Because I feel like Zilean is a perfectly fine thing for them to play. It works fine on Akali. It works fine on like a bunch of all the other things. I think Zilean also can get prio in a lot of matchups. Like Zilean isn't going to, in most cases, just like passively lose the lane either. So, yeah, for me, it's just, I find it so weird that people focus so much on what Bjergsen was picking this series rather than how TSM played out the map in terms of like the C9 TSM series. So
it's because, like, if I had to speculate and hypothesize, I'm going to go ahead and assume it's because of the semi-final where, like, he was just like, and obviously the games against Echo Fox where, yeah, he did look like he was carrying when he was on shit like Aurelia, so people just want him to, like, hard carry the fucking game, which doesn't really make sense, bearing in mind they acknowledge that TSM isn't just like Bjergsen anymore. It's supposed to be a bunch of good players and a coached team, so, like, we'd all love to roll back the years, like 5 years, and just play like that, but there's very few teams in the world do that. In fact, that's what's funny. I always wonder whenever I see comments like that if the person ever watches LCK, because like in LCK they don't just put the best mid laners and let them fucking hard carry the game all the time. Like even the best teams, even the ones that are super stacked like fucking KT, they just play around whatever they think they can get in the draft and then the win conditions for that game. It's sadly we're not in the world anymore where you just like, first pick me Aurelia, I will carry this game. It's like, that doesn't matter if you just fuck up the whole draft by doing it, does it?
It's hilarious because that's like legit. If you listen to the comms for how RNG were setting up in the final, it's like, if they first pick Kais, if they leave Kais open, we win the game.
Reasonable. Maybe that's one of those like need to know basis, you know, where you just let Uzi I think that, but then everyone else goes, no, we do what the coach said.
It's funny because, yeah, I mean, very few teams do play like that, though. And maybe that is your game plan, right? And in some cases, it'll work. Like, maybe actually for them, it's like if Zilean is open, we win the game, you know? Like, maybe that is the thought process. So just because Zilean is linked to a specific strategy. And maybe even if they think if Kai'Sa is open, we win the game, it's because Kai'Sa is linked to a specific strategy and not just the player. But it's really funny that this is kind of the mentality, and sometimes I think it's because like fans almost have it in their heads that their teams can't play like LCK teams for whatever reason, like that the only way that they can win is if they put Bjergsen on a super hard carry and he just like cheeses the fuck out of someone. But to me, that's actually just kind of sad. So that fans
that's your only win condition. Yeah, so, you're basically saying your team is shit.
Yeah,
you're like, this one player is good, but our team can't win as a team. Right, Croissant, when you look at how Cloud9 tried to play the final, like you said before that it sounded like they went for these weird pocket picks and they basically tried to do like some unorthodox shit. Like, do you think they just knew coming in they weren't going to just win straight up games, just standard how they've been playing all split?
No, I definitely don't think they came in with that mentality. I think they just they had certain things that they prioritized and they felt were really strong. Again, like Hecarim, Twitch probably shit stomped like 70+% of the games that they played in scrims. But every pro player and every coach knows that there are scrim picks and then there are on-stage picks. Okay. Some picks like Orianna might get rolled over a lot of the times in scrims because you see people playing Lee Sin, Syndra, and just camping it, but it's really hard to execute on stage, and that's why Golden Glue and Sven were getting, or should have gotten, so much props for how they abused Pobelter in that one game, Cloud9 versus Team Liquid earlier or towards the end of the split. But I don't have a problem specifically with picks like Twitch, right? I love Twitch. I tried to find many ways to make it work and crafted specific compositions. It just felt like Cloud9's team compositions as a whole didn't make a lot of coherent sense. And the order in which they were picking a lot of these champions did deserve criticism, at least in games 1 and 2, because Olaf, for example, and I don't know who these teams have been scrimming or what their priorities have been, but EU had a lot more priority on Olaf. He was banned and picked in almost every single game, whereas in NA it was left up pretty often or not picked at all. And the fact that Olaf would get to 4 or 5, or that Cloud9 would be on red side and they would know that. I personally don't mind if you let Sion through, because okay, you're not just going to take the Sion away always if you're Cloud9, because Licorice could not be comfortable on it. He could, they could be worried that Team Liquid has a pick against it. And I mean, you could see that in the Cloud9 TSM series, right? Cloud9 played Ornn 4 times in a row, and then Hanser was just like, fuck it, give me Ornn. And then I was like, okay, I mean, I knew, I live tweeted, if Hanser takes Ornn, then they're going to put Licorice on Poppy. And they put Licorice on Poppy, and he just smashed the game, and Cloud9 won against TSM. But in this case, yeah, there's a lot of reasons for why Cloud9 might not have wanted to take away the Sion. And if you ban the Sion, then you leave one of 3 picks open, right? They were banning Rakan, Thresh, and Varus in every single game. In game 3, the adaptation Cloud9 made was to stop the Thresh ban and then ban Kai'Sa, because C9 fans were complaining, or fans in general were complaining, Sion and Kai'Sa are the 2 big problems, but they couldn't ban both of them, so they banned the Kai'Sa. And then, of course, after they banned Kai'Sa and then they lost, Sion was a problem because he went 3-0 over the course of the series. But my problem is none of those things, because there's a bunch of reasons for why it would make sense. My problem is if Team Liquid is blinding Sion on 3 on blue side, and then Cloud9 has 4th pick, and then they have the last pick. Why are you picking Lee Sin for Svenskeren and then last picking Ornn? The Sion's going top. It's not some sort of weird flex. You can pick the Ornn, but what ended up happening was Cloud9 takes Lee Sin, and then Team Liquid goes for a really powerful 4-5 jungle mid duo. They go Sidrani, Aurelia. And at that point, I know that C9 is dead. Rip C9, because Lee Sin Malzahar will never accomplish anything meaningful in a game against Sidrani, Aurelia. And one thing that Cloud9 did really well in the TSM series is they had Graves and Malzahar, Zillion, Kindred. They have these combos, right? But as we talked about earlier, if you know that you're playing Svenskeren, Golden Glue, then you ban Graves instead of banning Zillion in 1, 2, 3. And so Team Liquid's bans were Akali, Zillion, Kindred in game 1, and then they just switched out the Zillion for Graves because they know that Cloud9 will just blind pick Graves and Malzahar together. But yeah, Cloud9 just some of their picks like Hecarim and Lee Sin were shut down either through Team Liquid's superior map play and just Xmithy tracking the enemy jungler, or through the picks just not really working out and not really having any options against something like Aurelia Sidrani. And I think Liquid deserves credit and Pobelter deserves credit, because Golden Glue had the same matchups against Bjergsen and he didn't get shit on as hard. So I don't know, it could be maybe Golden Glue didn't respect Pobelter as much as he respected Bjergsen, or I personally like to think that Pobelter just played more aggressively and capitalized on a window that maybe Bjergsen was unable to capitalize on. But overall, I would say that Cloud9 did lose in draft, but I don't think they deserved. I think they deserve more criticism for their general approach and game plan, rather than being too blind to ban Sion because he's an unkillable tank. We've seen a couple of series where Sion has been, exploitable and definitely not the unkillable monster that many fans believe him to be, but like it is true that as soon as it hit 8.16, and before that, people were anticipating Sion to be really high priority because he's like one of the few tanks that can really pressure champions like GP. Whereas if you pick like an Orin into a GP, you're really on like this ticking time bomb, and your team honestly is like in a losing position from the beginning of the game. So I think Cloud9 should have been prioritizing Sion more leading up to the finals, and Licorice should have been more prepared to play that specific champion. But it should have been expected to, because I think we were on the same patch for all the playoffs, right? And Cloud9 had shown their priorities to be Ornn in the semifinals. And TSM tried to play Sion against Ornn, but they just, like, TSM just wasn't executing the Sion as well as Impact did. So yeah, credit to Impact, credit to Liquid for their preparation. And although Cloud9's picks didn't work out this time, I think that if they make the right adaptations and they're picking their special picks in the right places and then just picking more standard stuff in other situations, then they will definitely be able to, that will be an edge for them going into the gauntlet, because they'll have information against TSM or whoever is playing against them in the last round of the gauntlet. And it would be nice to see C9 win and just, like, you know, represent NA at Worlds.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't even necessarily just look at only their draft, though, because because even when they had matchups that should have been, like, decent for them or okay for them, they didn't always do that well. Like, yeah. They kept trying to force around the Ezreal Braum lane because it was Thresh into Braum to an extent, and then there are some openings there, but they couldn't. Like, Team Liquid were actually just kind of outplaying them in a lot of circumstances. Yeah. So it's like there's a lot of stuff where clearly they had a game plan and they had some ideas to approach it. They took red side. They wanted certain counter picks, but in some cases, Pobelter was just, like, outplaying in reverse matchups and stuff like this. So it was just kind of a really it felt like they got frazzled because their game one plan didn't go through. And so, yeah, I think it has way more to do with how they're looking at the game and just getting thrown off by the fact that their matchups didn't work out the way they want, the fact that they picked red sides to sort of get good matchups, most likely, and then that didn't work out for them. So,
okay, right. This will sound like a weird question, Croissant, because I do think Cloud9 was a pretty good team this split, and when actually all the players we've talked about in their own ways had their own charm, you know, and had times when they looked good in certain metas on certain champions. But one of the other things I noticed in this playoffs was, especially against TSM, people were going super hard on Licorice being like a monster top laner. And I noticed this was a trend throughout the whole split, because obviously when he first came into the team, he probably underwhelmed a bit in the spring split. Yeah, he was a lot better in the summer split. Could he actually have done anything in this series?
I think that he played GP, Ornn, and Cho'Gath. Kelsey, I don't know what you feel about it, because I actually didn't watch the third game super closely, but it did seem, from what I rewatched about it, he had lane pressure on Impact for sure, but he was just free food for Xmithy whenever Xmithy pathed top. And I think that, I mean, it's like a combination of Licorice not respecting, like, and not playing safely enough, but also he didn't have that many options after he didn't have Flash, and Svenskeren didn't appropriately set up for him. So I think that Licorice definitely didn't play as well as he did this series as he has the entire split. I don't think he's overrated or anything, but I was surprised by his performance, and also, like, Cloud9 picking GP for him, and then he didn't look super comfortable on it. He took Klepto against Sion instead of Grasp, which I think he really needed. It's very rare for people to take Klepto on GP nowadays, actually. And yeah, like, the Ornn was just a very big mismatch as well. But, I mean, the Ornn couldn't do much against Team Liquid's composition, even if Cloud9 was more ahead or if Licorice was playing better. So I think it's a combination of, yeah, C9 didn't set up properly whether in game or like pre-game stuff. And Licorice also just looked a little bit shakier on this stage than he normally does.
Okay.
It seemed like that, especially in the last game, kind of they wanted to be able. Okay, but let's put it this way. I feel like NA, especially in playoffs, has had a really big dragon obsession. Like there will be, you watch games in other regions where teams are happier, depending on other dragons, just like making a side trade for a Rift Herald or a turret on top side or something like this. And to an extent, C9 used to kind of be good at that, but since it switched to mostly tank versus tank, in a lot of situations on 8.16 in particular, it feels like a lot of these games in playoffs were just, okay, everyone is smashing against each other in bot lane, and whoever gets the first dragon is gonna have a good advantage, because usually someone is forcing this fight when they shouldn't. And in the third game, it felt like there should have been something that they could have done around top lane, especially since the Ezreal Braum lane wasn't really getting prio against the Ashe Thresh or anything like that. But it felt like Svenskeren was continuously trying to force something to happen bot lane, and so that just opened an opportunity for Smithy to actually trade sides in some situations. And in other cases, like Team Liquid just got back advantage and then went ahead and won the bot fight. So it was just really strange to me that they had this opportunity and they kind of picked for it in this instance, because they could get the Cho'Gath, and the Cho'Gath like famously is a champion that will push like in a lot of matchups, and he's really gankable if you don't get vision for him, but you can like force to control top side or something like this if you have him. So for me, it was just like kind of a weird mismatch of their expectations and their draft and how they played out the game.
Yeah, I think that if we're to put ourselves in the shoes of C9 and think maybe charitably what they were expecting going into this game, this is like, it feels like what a fan would try and kind of ask for, right? Doublelift is no longer on Kai'Sa, he's on Ashe, more immobile, and you can pressure the Ashe with the Trundle and you just gank him, and if you shut down Doublelift, then TL collapses. And I think that this is an example of why that's not the case, and you can argue it's like, oh, it's because of the Ezreal, but the Ezreal-Ashe matchup is actually one of Ezreal's better matchups, and it seems like when you tunnel in on trying to make something happen, if you can't execute it properly, or if TL just straight up outplays, as we talked about earlier, then yeah, I mean, Sion will take over against this Cho'Gath, and then C9 is just going to feel pressured, right? Like, even if it's just 1 or 2 kills onto a top laner, the game kind of stalls out because you can't do anything top anymore, you can't do anything mid, and your bot lane doesn't have an advantage where you were trying to play for that, and then Liquid will just win through strangling out C9. And so I think it's a good case study for what happens when you try to take a very simplistic approach to, or your game plan is just transparent, right? Shut down Doublelift. And this is why like Korean teams or Chinese teams may look at a team like Liquid and be able to execute the same strategy, but it takes all these other factors, and it requires a lot more than just attention or like deciding to do something, because you have to be able to switch up and adapt in the moment and get a gank off top and then just camp bot, or like yeah, I think it's really complex, and I think Liquid was just better than C9 here, and I don't think Liquid is as easy to exploit because of their one carry threat as a lot of teams seem to think. But I mean,
okay,
that
on their side of the
football.
equation, then what are they doing so well? Because as you say, like, you know, even from the way the roster was built, it's fairly telegraphed how they're going to play and who's going to do what. So what have they done so well to be this dominant?
I think it's because the difference between players like Pobelter and Jensen and Pobelter and Bjergsen is really not as big as a lot of people think it is, and it can get really bad, right? If it's exacerbated, and if Pobelter is in a bad matchup and Xmithy has an off game or isn't just outpathing the enemy jungler, then Liquid looks really exploitable in those moments. But I think if Liquid plays at the level of, you know, second half of MSI, or if they, I think it is surprising because I do think nerves is a thing for Liquid. If you look at the first game of their series against 100 Thieves, some people are trying to, they're like, oh, Rakara took a game off of Liquid, or he's the only person to take a game off Liquid, and C9 wasn't able to take a game off Liquid, but Liquid looked really bad in their first game against 100 Thieves, and then they just cleaned up and they, you know, rolled over Thieves, and I think C9 isn't necessarily worse than 100 Thieves. They just were playing against a more confident and more prepared Liquid coming to this finals. So what is Liquid doing well? I think Liquid has more play styles than people would think. Like the Aurelia from Pobelter is an example of what could be to come if Pobelter if he adds like one or two more champions that are like Aurelia, that are secondary carries, or not secondary, can be a primary engager or team fighter, and Doublelift just needs to, like, you know, output damage and play out lane, rotate the enemy AD carry in mid game. Then it's a core of Pobelter and Doublelift, and you know, like, I think Liquid, if you have a mid laner that can just dominate Pobelter and then you neutralize Doublelift, then it looks like Team Liquid doesn't have many options. But all I'm saying is that it's not as easy as it sounds. In fact, it's like impossible for any North American team to do, and it has been for like this season, right?
Okay.
It felt a lot like
go on.
the series that they were playing 2 mid much more, and they were taking advantage of the fact that C9, like, they almost never push past river, even if they have sideline picks, and they're always looking to, like, look for team fights, and a lot of their picks really, really telegraph that. And so TL went for things like Ryze, they went for things like Aurelia, and they tried to get, like, a good sideline to just be able to maximize sort of the resources that would go into their sideline, expecting C9 to sort of force around the bot lane. Like, so they know that Sneaky can play things like Quinn or something like this to make bot lane difficult. So I think they went in expecting some sort of force around bot and just made it so that they could get, like, good, strong mid-jungle duos that could get an advantage to, like, Ryze, even if he doesn't necessarily win the matchup it's being played into, has a good opening so that if your jungle wants to, like, level 2 path to mid, then you can suddenly get, like, a really good back for Ryze. You can suddenly get into a situation where Ryze has an advantage and makes it difficult for the enemy team to path to bot lane without your mid being able to roam first. You get priority on playing dragons by playing to mid if you expect the enemy team to play to bot, like stuff like this. So I think that helped them out a lot more. Just being able to have that, being able to play a more efficient, like, style where they were able to get as much resources as possible relative to C9 giving up resources to try to force. So I think that really helped them out.
Okay. Was Doublelift the best player in the series?
Did he get the MVP for the series? Because I felt like
let me double check for that.
I think Impact might have, and I think Impact.
I think you might be right.
Yeah.
Let me double check that.
Even if he didn't, I don't necessarily care.
No, it looks like Smithy did actually in the final. I just mean what your opinion is, but it looks like Smithy got it.
I think I would give it to. I actually kind of feel like Pobelter would have gotten my vote for this series, like, in honesty. So, I just think Pobelter was, like, has actually improved a lot just in his map play in general over the course of this play. I would say that's, like, the biggest growth point for Pobelter, which is surprising when you talk about a player who's played as long as he has. To just, like, talk about how the way that he's been able to play, like, a wider variety of champions. Like, I would say at the start of the season, his Aurelia, even though Team Liquid were playing it a lot, wasn't that great. that his Aurelia was like generally oppressive, even just in the 1v1 the series. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I actually felt like ProBelter was kind of the star of the series, and maybe you can look at that to sort of criticize how Jensen and Golden Glue played, but I think he played really well. So.
Yeah, one thing that ProBelter did say was he was pretty nervous going into playoffs. He had let a lot of community criticism get to him, as far as he will never match up to certain mid laners, or he'll never be able to perform internationally. But he said that he just watched all 5 games of Cloud9 versus TSM, which is something you'd think that like every player does, or like the coaches at least try to make them do. But it's not that common, honestly. It takes a lot of energy to sit down and watch that many hours of games, and on top of all the scrims and like in-game stuff that pros do. And I think it does show, because as Kelsey said, I think his map movements and stuff isn't a product of like the Liquid's coaching staff definitely contributed to it, but I think a lot of that growth and a lot of ProBelter's strong performances come from himself and his own intelligence and the way that he views the game. So I would also agree that I think he was a solid rock that would definitely get my vote for MVP of the series as well.
I find that kind of a puzzling statement that he himself would say that like the narratives and the sort of hype basically got to him, even about himself. Because what's weird about that is, if there's no grain of truth to it at all, why would it affect you? If everyone's telling me that I'm like a shit AD carry and I'm the best AD carry, great. Then when I win the final and I'm fucking dominate, then everyone's going to look stupid. That would be the way my mind would look, And if you look at a lot of the champions, a lot of them feed off that kind of criticism. They love it when they prove people wrong. In fact, actually, I've always thought it's not that you try harder, but it might actually like focus you a bit more. It might make you think like, well, people are already talking shit on me anyway. If anything, it removes some of the overt criticism in a sense, because they don't have the same expectations. So I find that kind of weird he'd say, but if anything, that plays into his personality.
I see what you're saying, but I also think that, probably for ProBelter, it feels like a lose-lose for him, right? If he loses, then he was the reason his team lost. Sure. He wasn't up to par. If he wins, then he just played his role and like,
yes,
so
it was a double show, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, in a way that makes it so that he cannot prove himself no matter what he does. So he has to ignore, he can't feed off of it, but he also can't entirely ignore it, because maybe there's a grain of truth to it. He's probably not just like, oh, these haters are idiots. He probably thinks that to some extent, but he also gets affected by it, right? So it's like probably a very weird dynamic for him. Like for me, just like really quickly, there are times in which I get shit on pretty hard by like YouTube comments, or whether they're from like your shows, or I get like random DMs telling me to kill myself, and like I have a pretty thick skin in general, right? Like,
all right.
I've had a lot of I've worked with a lot of different kinds of people in a lot of different environments, and I've had people tell me to my face that there are things about my personality that they don't like, and it doesn't happen like all the time, but when it does, it affects me, and then I try to find a way to grow through it and not just ignore it. And so I think everyone processes these things differently, and I relate to how ProBelter just like I relate to how his career has gone over the last couple of years.
Okay. Because here's the thing: if I was going to say something to ProBelter, I would just say this, because I've seen this happen. It's a thing famously in sports. Like there's a player who maybe he's like a sick team player, but he's not that like the best player at his position, but he wins all the championships. And then believe it or not, they say the same thing, which is like, oh, I can never get credit. And I always just say like, dude, your credit is the trophy. Like, why do you give a fuck? If you win all the trophies, it doesn't really matter what people say. I said this to Haunter when me and him were having that debate of who's better, like Someday or him. And then I said, ultimately, I sent him this DM when he won the championship for TSM. I said, ultimately, it doesn't really matter why I think if you win the championship, does it? Like, I still don't think you were the best, but you won the trophy, so what the fuck do you care? It'd be one thing if you were on the worst team and I was saying that. So it's like, for those sorts of players, I feel like if you want to go get the credit, well, it's like what I said about Golden Glue. It's what you do, Paul Belter. You transfer tomorrow to Golden Guardians, and you're so fucking good on that utterly terrible team that everyone would have to acknowledge how wicked you are. Or you could stay in teams where, yeah, they're never saying you're the best player, but you win all the trophies. Like, I know which I'd pick, you know. But I get that, you know, it's not one or the other, sure.
Yeah.
Or you could just take the Odoamna approach and say, you know, I'm so sick in all these bad matchups. Bitches don't know how to play bad matchups like I do. I'm the real carry. Fuck all of you.
This is something that's going to really sadden me, I'm afraid, Kelsey, is that I've got a reflections with Odoamna in the can. And all I'm going to tell you is this. The part that's a bit depressing is you can tell, because of his experience in Splice, that he's actually come around on that one. And he actually now feels like he should have like demanded to play carries, and like that it was a mistake, and that, you know, people didn't rate him highly enough. You know, so unfortunately, I thought his mentality was sick. I agree. I had a lot of respect for it. It was kind of like what Soaz does now, you know. He just knows, like someone has to sacrifice, basically. But unfortunately, I guess it's a good topic. It shows how narratives get to people.
I think in the Splice team that's true, and I kind of always sort of felt like he should be demanding more pressure, because he like actually is really sick on carries. So sure. I don't know.
Here's the thing, maybe top League of Legends players are like that famous stereotype that the girl who has like the straight hair wants to like fucking use curlers on it all the time, and then the one with the curly hair is like straightening it all the time. It's like, maybe it's that thing. It's like, whatever you aren't, you have to be like, no, I can do it all. Listen, give me a chance, I can do everything. I'm amazed he would even say that point, because again, Team Liquid were favourites, so I don't know. Whatever. I like you, Paul Belter. I like you for who you are. Not who they say you are, not who you need to be. Just who you are, Paul Belter.
See, the more subs they add, the more the top 10, he's within the top 10 mid laners in the NA LCS starts to be significant, right? So
Exactly. Top half. Well done. He's in the top half for sure. They can't even argue that now. What about this then? Let's talk a little bit about the third place game. So obviously the main thing about the third place game was like the implication for Worlds, like TSM. It was important for them to try and win this series. Like the first thing I would like to address is, this is another example of how hard people will go in one direction on Reddit, on social media, and then it only has to be one game and they all of a sudden about turn. So the example here, obviously, is the entire discussion about the semi-finals that 100 Thieves played was like, what the fuck is Prolly doing? Like, they had no chance. It should have been Cody's son. He should have played. And then after this series, everyone was like, actually, maybe this guy's pretty good. Maybe Cody's son shouldn't be playing, and Prolly was right all along. He's a genius. So let's talk about that aspect first. Obviously, 100 Thieves did make the switch up for the semis, and then now in this third place, they began with that guy, and then the Rekai guy, and then they brought in Cody's son, almost as sort of like a, see, this is what that was my joke. It's almost like probably was like, oh, you want me to play Cody's son, do you? There you go, I'll put him in. Do you like that? Did you enjoy that? No, of course you didn't. Right, let's get back to this anyway. So what do you think about this series on the 100 Thieves side?
Okay, so this is one of those decisions where, so it wasn't just that people thought that it was ridiculous to play Rikara because he's like a rookie and stuff, and this is like going to be his first, not his first LCS, actually his first LCS match. I think the first time 100 Thieves played with Rikara on the main team might have been in Rift Rivals, or maybe they just used Brandini and Levi during that time. I don't know exactly, but I think the thing that was most upsetting to a lot of fans was when Cody said that he was told to watch from home and that he didn't even have the option of being subbed in, right? A lot of fans thought that was unreasonable, and even if Rikara was performing better or was the better player as deemed by the management or worked better with the team, that Cody's son should have at least been at the studio and been there to potentially play for the semifinals. Obviously, a lot of that flipped around when during this third place match, and Now more of the complaints were, why did they switch out Ricaro when he won? And even if there is some logic to that, like, you know, not losing the momentum, or like switching up so that some people think that a substitution after you've won can be good. But even though that's possible, after you lose 2 games with Cody, why not bring Ricaro back in to, you know, try and pull out another. Actually, no, they won the first game with Ricaro, they lost the second game with Cody, and then they won the third game with Cody, and then they played out again the last 2 games with Cody. But I think that this was definitely it was a good move by Prolly and good move by 100 Thieves, because they have more information for how both AD carries are performing, or like what kind of communication is provided by both players, what kind of laning and how they like match up to certain players. And I think it'll be useful for them in the gauntlet. But I do have some other speculations that I would want to talk about after hearing what Kelsey has to say.
Regarding 100 Ricaro and Cody's son.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on it?
I think that it was probably more just like, I mean, I really can't, I'm not going to wildly speculate, but it probably just had something to do with general feeling and dynamic within the team. Because a lot of substitutions are like that, or probably, I feel like so few substitutions actually have to do with the player just being better mechanically or worse mechanically, or one way or the other. Like, I don't think people get
usually
subbed out just because they're...
It's always someone saying it just felt better in scrims, you know, like that. It's like a very vague sense, right?
It's not like it wouldn't, if it is because scrims are going better because of Ricaro, it's not necessarily because Ricaro is like playing sick outplaying every matchup. Sure. And Cody's son is just like inting for his life. Like, it's really not straightforward like that. There's probably something less immediately obvious as a reason why Ricaro was being played. So that's my general thought on it.
Because, you know, we've had this discussion many times, obviously, because Cody's son has been a topic of discussion basically the whole time he's been on Immortals and now through to 100 Thieves, especially because these are top teams. So when you're in a top team, people are going to look for people who make mistakes, or perhaps as someone who's like letting the team down. Like, obviously, I don't think you have to overreact to what happened in that 5th game, where he did obviously do like a ridiculous, ill-advised move. But what I would say is this, the one thing I worry about with Cody's son is I actually do think he has some talent. I can see why people think he has promise and potential. It's just, for me, the problem is, if this was like his 2nd split, I'd have a lot more time. But this is split 4, and he's now been on 2 different orgs, and he's been on orgs that in theory had good coaching staff. And it's like, what do people think is going to like cause some radical transformation in him? Because one of the things that kills me about him as a player is, if you're the AD carry, one of the number one things I want in my AD carry is to be really responsible with your life. Like, you never let yourself die in like a scenario where it's really risky and there's like no reason to do something, or you're like overextending, or even worse, you're in a team fight and you just like consistently do weird mispositions. Like, you go and look at some of the good EU AD carries. I mean, a great example is obviously someone like Forgiven. You can go to the beginning of this guy's career and he knows from the beginning exactly where he should be in a team fight, what the threat at any point in time is. In fact, I've even seen games where I've watched, and I would say to Forgiven, because I was friends with him, obviously, so I could talk to him privately, I would say, what did he do in that game? Like, I looked at, he did nothing in that team fight. And then he basically would just say, well, look at this part here. Like, actually, if I move in a little bit there to get in attack range, this player's waiting for me, you know, he's actually basically zoning me off. And then if I go to help this guy over here, they'll all collapse on me and then I die and we can't win the fight. He's like, you know, even though we didn't win the fight, I actually was playing it where I was actually giving myself the best chance, where, yeah, I needed a couple of things to happen, but maybe I could have won if everything had gone perfect. Like, I don't think Cody's son even knows what's going on in those scenarios. He looks like when it gets chaotic, it just panics or something. And so I can't know this. It's obviously all speculation, but put it this way, the results aren't making it look like I'm right. That's all I can say in that scenario. So if he turns it around, congrats. I'll say great job to whatever coach worked with him, whatever he improved upon. But I feel like I've seen a lot of these same, like, almost fatal flaws every split I've seen him play now. And this is with different supports as well, you know, so you can't just blame it on Ole or whatever, you know. He's had some pretty good supports.
Yeah, I think that since he's played with Ole and Aframu, people would definitely rate him lower as a result, because he has such strong supports that, you know, make him shine, etc. I don't think he played well this series at all. I think that it is some of the weakest performances I've seen from Cody. I think it's weaker than like what he did at Worlds, even though people memed him a lot for the big Cody Sun insect, whatever that was.
Yeah.
And I've been a proponent, or I've been a pretty active, I've been a vocal supporter of Cody, I think even on your show before.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that he kind of reminds me of, not totally, but I mean, there are players like Stixxay who people thought were about to fall off and just like never shine again without Aframu, or like a support, or that he had peaked too early. And most of the players that I know, a lot of the bot laners or just general, even like junglers, etc., think that Stixxay and Biofrost are just insane, right? And that they were like the shining light on CLG this split and also last split. And so I think that, you know, I can see that working out for Cody. I'm not sure, like, you know, there's a lot of speculation from the community based off of like interviews with Afro, or like, you know, just a lot of media information that Cody has an ego, that he, you know, doesn't work well with teammates or doesn't work well with Afro. And then there's speculation about whether Afro's having another one of his ultimatums, etc. And that this series, the stupidest thing I read about this whole situation was definitely like, oh yeah, 100 Thieves knew they were going to lose with Cody, but they felt bad for him and wanted to give him like one last send off and let him play, and, you know, let the community see that it's not a mistake to throw Cody to the side and keep Rikara for the future. I think a lot of that's ridiculous, but I do think that maybe Cody needs a change of environment or a new team to kind of.
What type of team would you like to see around him? Like, since you're someone who, as you said, a supporter in some sense. So what kind of team do you think he would thrive
in? I think he would thrive in a team like Echo Fox. I think a team with Cody, Smoothie. Yeah, I mean, I think that you could have 3 lanes of pressure, very aggressive play style. I think that, and then with that, Lost isn't even an import. There would be no import slots there except for Huni, and I mean, DeMonte is definitely doing his job on Echo Fox, but a lot of people think that like Phoenix drew a lot more pressure to his lane, and even though Phoenix had a smaller champion pool, he was performed maybe at a higher level or at a higher ceiling than someone like DeMonte could. So if you had, again, Cody and Smoothie as the NA native bot lane and Dardoch as the jungler, and you had someone like Huni, and you had another fantastic mid lane import that like could even be like top 3 in NA, then you would have yourself a like finals or even championship level team, IMO. But I mean, Cody would obviously have to do a lot of growth, but I don't think that it's like impossible for him, and I don't think that I can see his career going up from this year, and I can also see it, you know, plateauing or going down. It just depends on how he like, what kind of coaches work with him and what kind of what his general approach is to the future, for sure.
Okay, right, but, Kelsey. Let me ask you it this way. So I want your thoughts on Cody Sun as well, but it's a small sample size. But if you're 100 Thieves, would you actually make the switch and go with the other player? Does it matter? Can you just use both? What would you think?
I think that if they're making this change, there has to be something weird. So maybe in that case, it's best to just go for another player. to go with the other player and see what happens. 100 Thieves might be a team where they end up kind of revamping a lot of their roster in the offseason just because they have like a weird situation with the jungler. They have where Onda feels like he might be kind of a holdover until they can see what happens in offseason, or maybe they want to swap out some players in the bot lane, things of that nature. So I'm not entirely sure exactly if we're assuming that the entire roster will stay the same, then yeah, maybe they should just go for Akara if something's strange going on. But that again, like, presupposes that. I kind of wanted to ask Croissant a little bit. Do you think that his teams and his coaches have sort of put Cody Sun on the wrong champions or in the wrong role then? Because he always like seems to be gravitating towards these like hyper carry type picks. Like he played Kog'Maw when Kog'Maw was like more of a scaling carry pick. He played the Tristana, things like this, and this seems, and like he'll go on teams with a strong top lane or a strong solo lane. Do you think he should be on strong solo lane teams and just like provide a lane of pressure, or do you think he should be on teams where they're playing tanks and he's like the hyper carry, or do you think it's something else entirely and just like Echo Fox seems like a good place where he could have a good change or a good growth?
I think that Cody can play a variety of styles. When he was not on Immortals yet, he was playing. I like met him a couple of times in solo queue, and that's when I became like a big fan, because when it came to a high pressure situation or like a really tense team fight, he would make not just the right plays, but like aggressive plays that were incredibly creative at the same time. He would flank on Twitch. He would have a really good positioning as Misfortune. And a lot of these AD carries were like open up and have a really impactful ult or have good positioning. But lately he's been playing a lot more Tristana, but he's also played Varus, Xayah, Jhin, etc. And so I think he can play a good number of styles. I don't think that he just has to play the hyper carry. And so because of that, I see him, but I do see your point about maybe he would be better served on a team like what Liquid is doing with Doublelift, but just, he wouldn't be. I think what Doublelift brings to Liquid is not just his, his laning or his team fighting, but it really is Doublelift's shot calling and his presence and leadership in the game or in the team. And so I think rather than talking about the play styles that Cody would need or like the types of laners, it would be he needs to be paired with a player that has a loud voice and that kind of leadership, but not necessarily that coming from the support. Because I think if you think about the 100 Thieves dynamic, right, you have two Korean laners who are like, by all standards, whether you know them in person or you watch their streams, they're not that vocal. Ryu and Someday do their thing. They are role players. They can also, shine on certain picks, but that's not to say they don't contribute to shot calling or to like a game plan, but they're not the primary shot callers. And you have Afromu, who's laning with Cody. Sometimes he has boom moments where he like jumps in, kills himself, or in lane, maybe I haven't watched that much of Cody's and Afro's laning. But I would say in general, people would consider Cody a stronger laner relative to other AD carries than Afro is to other supports in North America. And then in the jungle, you had another secondary voice with Meteos, but that was taken away because of, team cohesion and the environment. And now you have Onda. So what I would like to see most from Cody is to have a veteran jungler like Xmithy, and for him to just have like a strong lane dominant support. And then I don't really like mid lane, like the solo laners can be role players like Pobelter and Impact, or they could just be like, Huni, or Power of Evil. It doesn't matter, because I don't think Cody needs a ton of resources in the bot lane. I think he can play a high resource style and also like a utility focused style. So
okay. What about on the TSM side of the equation? Like, has TSM impressed you over this playoff run?
Kelsey, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I think kind of the characterization that I've had for TSM throughout the split still sort of holds true, where they don't necessarily play super like strong mid jungle duo where they're controlling the game, but they're good at playing like really good with defensive vision, really good at playing in a situation where teams might not be moving up their vision line or might not be moving with the wave and are in a position where TSM can collapse and catch on them and play like really strong team fights and come back from that sense. They have a really good sense of when they should group and when they should catch waves from behind. And some of their issues just come from when sort of they have to play proactively and they don't necessarily have good setup for if the enemy team wants to trade sides or something along those lines. I think 100 Thieves is a really good team for them to have played against because of the fact that 100 Thieves kind of like sort of zone off of wave before they push it, and so that makes them like really easy to get caught out in the mid to late game. They also don't move up their vision lines extremely well, so the fact that the series ended up being as close as it was kind of says things about like TSM still being shaky overall. But I do think that they wouldn't necessarily be the worst team to represent NA at Worlds. I think I still kind of favor them over C9 just because I do think that they're a little bit more resourceful and they have a little bit more answers when they get into difficult situations. But they didn't wow or impress me or shock me or anything like this.
So for me, I think that Grig has been. I don't frequent the TSM subreddit that often, but I used to be. Yeah, I used to be a very big TSM fan, and I don't think I've ever seen as much vitriol towards one TSM player, other than Grig. Maybe Glarbu. I don't know how you say that. And it seems really misplaced to me because I felt that given Grig's experience and given the situation that he's put into and the team that he's put into, I thought that he has some really questionable moments, but he definitely is a better jungler than a lot of people give him credit for. That being said, he looked really shaky for a lot of TSM's games and a lot of their series, but although TSM didn't wow me with their playoff run, and they didn't like it wasn't like super inspiring. I wouldn't put them above or below Cloud9, or I wouldn't put them above Cloud9 right now. But I do think this is the best thing that could have happened for TSM. They got 15 games in their playoffs. Like I'm so jealous because that plus tiebreakers means that they played twice as many games as I got to play this split. And it's like, I think that would probably put Grig up there, like in the top 10 or 20 junglers in terms of amount of playoff games played in North America, right? So the speed at which Grig is growing and he's learning stuff and he's gaining confidence and working with, TSM has like 5 coaches. They got Weldon on top of that too. I cannot see TSM collapsing in Gauntlet. I think they have built up and earned a lot of experience and will definitely be a contender, a very serious contender against Cloud9 to represent NA as for the 3rd spot at Worlds. And I think that I thought TSM's drafts, unless I'm missing something, I think they were quite good across all 3 of their series. And each team that they dealt with, right? Cloud9, 100 Thieves, and Echo Fox attack kind of brought a different they all have different styles, and because of that, TSM has a lot of information and data to work off of to see how their own team responds to certain situations. Because I think there were, a lot of cases where 100 Thieves would just group up, pressure TSM, and then TSM would get something from it. They would like pick off Afro, and then they would just run to Baron, and then 100 Thieves would clean them up, take the Baron, and then get a huge advantage off of that. So a lot of these situations were really frustrating for me as a viewer and as a, still kind of half fan, where I felt like TSM had a very simple win condition and didn't have to do anything special, and then they tripped and fell. But it's better that they do that now, and I don't see the caliber of players and staff that they have as making that mistake more than 2 or 3 times, right? Like they don't learn super fast, but when they do learn it, and when they drill it in, and when they like identify it as a problem that they need to fix, I think TSM knows what to do and does it in a structured enough way that they will definitely improve their overall gameplay. And because of that, I think that TSM definitely learned a lot during this playoffs run, and I would actually say they're my favorite for the Gauntlet. Although I know a lot of people are thinking Echo Fox, maybe because Huni was sick during playoffs and they've had a lot of time to prepare. But I just see TSM as being a more well-rounded and just more well-rounded coming into this.
I guess for me, I don't necessarily have as much faith in you and TSM's ability to learn, because I feel like they have had similar problems structurally for a really long time, just in terms of how the team plays and how they think about jungle play. And I don't necessarily think that the org is unaware of these problems, right? It's just that getting it to communicate and getting that information in a way that makes sense, or getting a system that flows well, just hasn't worked out for them yet. And however, because they've had these problems in place for a really long time, as an organization, and with Perkz and Perkz in place, they have ways that get around it, at least within an NA context, and they're very creative within that context, and within making sure your defensive vision is really on point, and getting the picks you need, and just knowing how your waves are going to work. And if you can't necessarily make this trade, or you're not really sure how you'll make this trade with the side waves the way they are, then just you look for picks. Just really working around these problems, and that's why I think that they're more resourceful and they're more resilient in that sense. And so I have more faith in them in the Gauntlet than the other teams, and I just think that they have pretty good matchups into the remaining teams in the Gauntlet. So it's kind of my feeling.
How do you actually think that 100 Thieves will fare in a world scenario? Obviously, it's wild speculation because, it's weeks away. No one knows yet. So, no one... I mean, people will still put you in meme compilations, but you don't have to worry yourself about whatever you say.
This is Sunday's first time at Worlds in how long?
No, he played in Season 5 with KT Rolster.
Mm.
Yeah, so 3 years, I guess.
Well, there is maybe people have a lot of faith in Prawley after his last Worlds run. I think that 100 Thieves I'm excited to see 100 Thieves and Liquid, because we haven't had this much fresh blood represent, or not players, but organizations representing North America in ages. We've always sent TSM, CLG, C9, and then just Immortals, and then LMQ. I don't know if there's anyone outside of that. Well, there's XDG or Vulcan, whatever. But the point being that I think if it's all
only
about
one of TSM or C9 can go is the point. So yeah.
Yeah. And and I think he, if they figure out their AD carry situation, maybe figure out how to utilize Rikara versus Cody, or just pick one, and if their subs are actually useful, and if Onda grinds out, scrims and Korea solo queue, because I think he definitely has a lot of potential as an NA jungler. I think that at minimum, 100 Thieves will do about as well as Immortals did in their Worlds run. And yeah, I mean, I think that Liquid is the only team that NA fans should have expectations for to get out of groups. Anything else is a bonus, but I just don't think it'll be a shit stomp. I don't think North American teams will go 0-6 or do any worse than they have in the past. Just 3 teams not making it out of groups is the worst thing that can happen, and it's already happened to us so many times. So like, it is what it is.
It's just it's like this is someone who no longer fights it, Which I think it's genuinely sad, because I don't necessarily have any faith in 100 Thieves to do well, but it's like you gotta kind of want something more, Anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, I will say that I love Someday and Ryu as people. I think Aframu is a great guy as well, and wait, he didn't even get to go to Worlds in Season 7, right?
No, because he's on CLG, mate. Yeah,
and then Season 6 they went to Worlds, but they
were in the group with ANX and G2 and Rockstaggers, yeah.
Yeah, and then Season 5, Afro was also at Worlds, but they had like this weird thing with like Smithy potentially not being able to play, and then like I think maybe some players knew that they were not going to be on the team in the future. But anyway, I think that I personally want North America to do well, and I'll do everything in my power to help the teams.
It's not a short trial,
No, yeah, for sure. But like,
obviously,
I'm going to be back in school. I'm going to be in Chicago. But I see the weird thing for me is I don't know if making content about North American teams and pointing out their flaws is helpful or detrimental, right? Because it's double-sided. This is also assuming that my content's even like on point in the first place, but if it is, then other teams can watch it to understand the weaknesses or like the strengths and weaknesses of a team. But then a team can also watch that content themselves and then improve off of it. So, I mean, I've talked to some teams also about helping them, and it ideally for me and hopefully for other North American, I think a lot of North American teams and players should do more of what Reignover did in Season 5 or 6 when Immortals couldn't go. He helped out CLG, and like eventually that was helpful for his career because he got signed to CLG.
A bit of both.
But yeah.
You never know if it's a blessing or a curse till the end. So
yeah,
some would say that's a prison, a Bane-like prison he has never escaped from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I do think that 100 Thieves has the tools. Like they're not so outclassed in player skill against other teams internationally. If they're creative, if they have good practice and have a game plan going in, then I think that they can definitely upset, because it's not about like it's not about the narratives at the end of the day. It's about the process that a team has. And despite what 100 Thieves failures in, people think that they've only won one series in NA, and that was against a Clutch Gaming, which was a weak team.
Sure.
But like,
they beat FlyQuest as well, but yeah.
Oh yeah, they beat FlyQuest.
Sure.
But they definitely earned their spot going to Worlds, and I think it's ridiculous to claim.
Like, here's the thing, that narrative, don't worry, that's actually I've saved one of those comments for Thorin versus Reddit, but the very quick version is, that logic doesn't make sense, since 99% of the people using that logic are TSM fans, and what's the reason why they played Clutch Gaming? Because TSM couldn't win the series. So, like, that logic is so utterly stupid, it's unbelievable. And also, let me know all the series TSM's winning. What? Oh, shit. Yeah, amazing. So, I've never understood why people do that. Like, argue one side of an argument, and then you go, continue, and they go, no, I'm done. I'm not going to say any of the other parts that would disagree with anything I've said, so I win. Right, okay, what about this then? To wrap this episode up, obviously no one knows in theory. I mean, with franchising, I'd have to look on the database, but I'm guessing a lot of these players probably have the 2-year contracts, you know, and so in theory, a lot of these squads are going to stay together and go on. Hasn't this year been generally, in terms of LCS, hasn't the level been a bit dodgy? I mean, I know these are all new squads generally, you know, but it feels like a bit of a mess in NA LCS. I mean, Team Liquid's come out of it and looked good, but it's been a lot of up and down.
Kelsey, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think this has been a better or worse split of NALCS than past ones, but I do think, like, there are a few things that are a little bit more worrying from this playoffs than I think in past, which is just, like, a lot of games just feel very similar to each other. Like, regardless of comps, like, teams are just playing out the game the same as they did before, even if, like, their win condition is in a different lane, or it's just really weird to see, like, a strange amount of monotony just in NA playoffs, where I kind of, like, forget which game am I even watching anymore at a point, because it's like, oh, did this happen in this game or this game? Whereas if I'm VOD reviewing, like, other games or other series, or even NA games before this playoff series, it felt like there were more, like, distinct moments or distinct differences that teams playing differently depending on their picks and stuff like this. So for me, that's, like, a really troubling thing. Like, the only team that I really do think can necessarily put up a huge fight at Worlds based on, like, some of the playoff series that we've seen is Team Liquid. I do think Team Liquid are actually a much better team relative to their international counterparts compared to where they were at MSI. So I'm going to, like, come up with a better idea on this once we know, like, all the teams that are going, but I do feel like there's a big kind of jump down from Team Liquid and the rest of NA right now. So.
Yeah, I would agree that Team Liquid is far and above the other North American teams right now. But looking back at the NALCS split and how teams' performances reflect on where we will be at in Worlds, or even moving on to next year, I would say that franchising had its positive influences on teams like Cloud9, where they could bench certain players and they could, you know, try to bring in rookie talent, figured out that they preferred Zazal over Smoothie. Very controversial decision, but, like, they were able to make certain moves, and Cloud9 is definitely happy with, like, the growth that they've experienced, because Cloud9 got 3-0'd for the first time in, like, a best of 5 series ever with the Sneaky Jensen Smoothie roster against Liquid in the spring. And they were just, like, I would say that Cloud9 has grown since then. Liquid has also grown since then. TSM really lost its footing, but, like, at least towards the end of the split, they grew. I think a lot of the teams in North America were not able to push the fold, or, you know, push the envelope, whatever the phrase is. And that was unfortunate, because I think that these teams were, you know, we had 4 fresh teams: Golden Guardians, Clutch, OpTic, and FlyQuest. Or no, FlyQuest is already in, so what was the last one? Anyway, we had fresh teams that were starting from scratch. And I know that there were teams that had, you know, they weren't as bad as other new teams that would come in through relegations when it comes to getting facilities or air conditioning, you know, that kind of stuff. But there were still a lot of obstacles, and teams like OpTic didn't have the infrastructure necessary for the team to even for players to feel like they were improving week to week until the summer. Yeah, I was just going to say that. So Europe definitely, just from looking at the playoffs of places like Europe and Korea and China, which still hasn't finished, it is worrying that North America seems to have a much more vanilla approach to the game, right? Like in one series, you could see more variety from EU finals than like most of NA LCS playoffs. There are still like some moments that make League special are when players like Bengi, you know, Bengi's put on Italy for the first time. He hasn't practiced it. Like Broxa said that he was put on Zac, even though Fnatic had very little practice with it in scrims. Those are the kinds of things that might, it seems small, but it could really affect North America going into Worlds. Because I think a lot of the times coaches and players need to have, or players need to have the trust in coaches to make those kinds of calls and make those kinds of decisions. And the reality is that there's actually, even though Liquid has great infrastructure, right? You have teams like Fnatic and you have teams like Vitality, where, in all honesty, and as a North American coach, it feels like Yamato and Youngbuck command more respect and command more faith from a lot of their players. Whereas in North America, you know, the only time that a coach gets praised is Kane, and that's because he's challenger in NA solo queue while also coaching. But you have teams like TSM where Song, you know, is a fall from grace. A lot of people in the community view him very differently from when he was coming into TSM. Reapered is, you know, he's either the worst coach in North America, then he's back to the best and winning the coach of the split, and again criticized for his pick and ban. So I'm not saying this doesn't happen in Korea or in EU, but I didn't see nearly as much experimentation from a lot of North American teams as I expected to. Coming in to this split as my first split, working with Zabatine, I felt like OpTic, if anything, you know, we got off to a rough start, but once we were on our stride, we were doing more, we were theory crafting more, and we were pulling out picks like Zillion support and, you know, top lane carries and side lane pressure that a lot of NA teams either didn't feel like they could pull off, or they just weren't willing to try it. And so I think that there's no way that North America will achieve anything if the next month is used on going into scrims, playing the same meta picks, and not developing, each team developing their own style, each team developing their own, you know, playing around what tools they have and what tools they do not have, being conscientious of that. I think the coaches going into it and the staffs going into it, I have faith in Liquid, I have faith in 100 Thieves and Probably, and I'll definitely have faith in most of the teams in the gauntlet right now, whichever one makes it to Worlds. But right now, I would personally favor Europe if my fandom wasn't a consideration. And I just hope that my colleagues in, like, you know, North America can prove me wrong on that analysis.
This video was kindly supported by Gardner Wilson, Dean Tanglis, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, godawfulwasteofspace, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, James Harding, Daniel Yordanov, VeXii, Robert Baxter, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear in my content? Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers for upcoming content and guests? Want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today. Link in the description box.